Chapter 14:13. With this palm strike, I will end your life and injure your soul. You will be like a rootless duckweed. You will no longer have karma, and you will also lose the cycle of reincarnation. This is your punishment for making me call you a father, Su Ming said flatly. Su Xianyi's expression changed drastically again. Only at that moment did he notice that an indescribable pain was coming from his body. It was as if there was a plant growing in his body. In shock, he looked inside himself and immediately saw that his soul had become semi-transparent and much weaker. His qi and blood had also become a mess, as if they were being devoured by an invisible force. They were also becoming weaker. You can use me, even if you have to gather my soul together in space and use it to accompany your children as they grow. You can leave a slave mark on me so that I will always be your slave. You can, but you shouldn't use it to use the people around me. Use Xian. A hint of killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. Once he finished speaking, he took a swift step forward again and instantly closed in on Su Xianyi. Su Xianyi's pupils shrank, where he immediately moved back. Ferociousness and madness appeared on his face. He squeezed the ancient jade in his right hand again, and cracking sounds echoed in the air. The ancient jade was crushed in half, and an astonishing will erupted from it. It instantly surrounded Su Xianyi. There was a primitive air to it, as well as an ancient air that had existed for an endless amount of time. That will did not belong to the current aeon. That ancient air was something that only existed in the previous aeon could possess. The strength of that was comparable to when Su Ming possessed true Morning Tao world. It was a will that belonged to a powerful warrior who stood at the peak of the previous aeon. It was an old monster who had surpassed those in Avicania realm. He should not have died, which was why his will was so great and filled with indestructible life force. However, there was also a thick aura of death contained within that life force. The appearance of that will immediately cause the air around Su Xianyi to distort and turn into an ancient face. There were signs of time on that face, but it was incredibly ferocious. Its eyes were bloodshot, and at the moment it appeared, it threw its head back and roared, letting out a crazed roar that shook the sky and earth. This was the first time this will appeared in this aeon. At the instant it appeared, the rapidly fading will from the Emperor of Abyss True World shuddered, and all of Arid Triad seemed to have gathered their gazes on it. This was the first time that the group of old monsters who had fused with their other selves, those slumbering monsters, had truly revealed their auras to the world. This wasn't the doppelganger of Tion and the others. After all, it was just a doppelganger. But now this was the true will of this person. This was his entire will. For the first time, a different look appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Even he had not expected that Su Xianyi would have this sort of ancient jade. But even if the will was equivalent to that of a true world, to Su Ming, it was still unable to withstand a single blow. At the instant his right hand touched the face formed by the will, its roars came to an abrupt halt. Disbelief and madness appeared on its face, and it swiftly charged towards Su Ming to suppress him. Su Ming let out a cold harumph. Morning Tao World's will, Immortal Footsteps will, Sky Hill's will, and a part of Abyss will instantly gather together to suppress the will that had overestimated itself. This was a clash between wills. It was as if the power of an adult was fighting against a child, and there was no balance in this battle. Booming sounds reverberated through the entire cultivation planet. When they traveled out of the galaxy and reverberated in all directions, the face formed by Su Xianyi's will immediately crumbled to pieces. As if a violent gust of wind had swept through the area, it disappeared without a trace. Su Ming pushed his right hand against Su Xianyi's chest again. With it, Su Xianyi coughed up a dozen mouthfuls of blood in succession. He fell back swiftly, and his face was stark pale. For the first time, fear appeared in his eyes. This palm strike weakened your cultivation base, destroyed your qi and blood, and destroyed your divine sense, Su Ming said softly while staring at the pale Su Xianyi. You could have used me to nourish the seed of life extermination, but you shouldn't have let Yuxian continue down my path and give up everything for the seed of life extermination. You were even worried about her resistance and struggles. So you imprisoned her thoughts, soul, and memories so that she could become one with your son and complete the seed of life extermination. You shouldn't have done this. Dragons have reverse scales, and so do humans. You've touched mine multiple times. Tell me, how should I end this grudge? Killing intent appeared in Su Ming's eyes. At the instant it appeared, he took a step forward again and charged towards Su Xianyi. This killing intent had been buried in Su Ming's heart for a long, long time. From the moment he learned that everything was fake and felt that he was an incredibly ludicrous person, a powerful killing intent towards Su Xian had been born within him. Now, after accumulating this killing intent for countless years, it finally erupted. At the instant killing intent appeared in Su Ming's eyes, his body closed in on Su Xian like a blade that demanded Su Ming's life. Su Xian laughed brokenly. When he saw Su Ming's arrival, a ferocious and desperate look suddenly appeared on his face. The two halves of the ancient jade fragment in his palm were crushed to powder. At the instant the ancient jade was crushed, Su Xianyi's hoarse voice traveled forth with a shrill tone. Iamoko. These three words sounded like a curse, but more than that, it sounded like a name. It was a name that was completely different from the pronunciations of the people in this aeon. Perhaps more accurately speaking, this was the name of a powerful warrior from the previous aeon. At the instant these three words tumbled out of Su Xianyi's mouth, the world roared. The entire Emperor of Abyss, true world, trembled violently. All of Arid Triad seemed to have become different at that instant. Immediately after, the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss, true world, crumbled, and the earth cracked. A huge crack shot through the entire planet and spread to the sea, causing it to roar. A muffled roar came from the crack in the ground. At the instant it appeared, a huge hand formed by blood fog stretched out of thin air behind Su Xianyi. It seized Su Xianyi, turned him around, and used the power of the back of its hand to fight against Su Ming's incoming attack. Booming sounds surged into the sky. The blood fog swiftly dissipated, but it managed to resist Su Ming's attack. Once it saved Su Xianyi, the roar from the crack in the ground became several times stronger. It reverberated in the air, and the sky turned red, causing the entire cultivation planet to instantly turn crimson. The planet looked as if it had turned into a red sun, and the red color spread out and spread into the galaxy. As the red color spread out and the roar echoed in the air, a crimson figure rushed out from the crack at the bottom of the sea. At the instant it appeared, the seawater tumbled about, and booming sounds surged into the sky. The figure moved with astonishing speed, and in the next instant, it appeared in the sky. With a bang, it seized Su Xianyi. It was a middle-aged man whose entire body exuded a thick bloodlust. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was madness in them. He was bare-chested, and there were countless scars on his body. These scars turned into a powerful, murderous aura that enveloped the world. Who made me wake up beforehand? Who interfered with my plan to not be destroyed? Who dared to provoke my disciple? Damn it! All of you should die. All living beings must die. Die, die, die. The figure seemed to have gone mad. As he roared, he lowered his head and swept his gaze past all the people on the ancient tree. All those who met his gaze felt their blood flow in reverse. Their eyes instantly filled with red, and they felt as if their bodies were about to explode. Aside from Su Ming, aside from Yuxian, who was protected by him, aside from his elder, aside from the third prince, even the sovereign of Dawn, Yin Pei's heart trembled at that moment. He immediately cursed the other two sovereigns of Dawn from Dark Dawn and the three powerful warriors in Avicania realm from Saint Defire. He originally thought that he had snatched a chance to enter Arid Triad, but he first ran into Su Ming, who terrified him, and now he saw the old monster shrouded in red light. No matter who it was, they had the ability to kill him. Entering Arid Triad was not a chance at all. It was clearly a dangerous place where the slightest bit of carelessness could lead to his death. I can't believe I saw two of my fellow Taoists in perfect condition here. And there's one more. The method that works isn't right, but it achieves the same result through different means. But this doesn't give you the right to interfere with my plan and make me wake up beforehand. The blood-red figure roared madly. As the world roared, a large amount of rain poured down. It was red, and even the sea beneath it instantly turned into a sea of blood. Su Ming frowned and let out a cold harumph. It immediately caused the blood-red figure in the sky to come to a halt. At the instant he looked towards Su Ming, he disappeared. Almost at the same time he disappeared, Su Ming's body also vanished. Booming sounds rang out in midair. Each one of them was deafening to the ears, causing the sky to look as if it was about to shatter. When the world looked as if it was about to collapse, the blood-red figure appeared in midair. He retreated swiftly, and a solemn and powerful fighting spirit appeared on his face, along with an even more intense madness. Blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. His chest had already collapsed, but his fighting spirit and madness became even more arrogant. You should be the strongest person in this aeon. I can sense that damn true world will on you. When the blood-red figure roared, Su Ming walked out of the air. He was dressed in white and had a head full of long hair. His expression was indifferent, but there was a piercingly cold look in his eyes. Almost at the same time, Su Ming and the blood-red figure fought against each other. A young man dressed in a long robe walked out of the sea of blood that had turned red with a calm expression on his face. Wherever he went, no one would notice him. It was as if he was one with the world. He did not lift his head to look at the sky. Instead, he walked under the ancient tree and stood on the surface of the sea. He stared at it and sighed softly. I'm here. Third day of double monthly votes. Please get double monthly votes. Chapter 14:14. Go back to your sleeping spot. It's not time for you to wake up yet, the white-robed Su Ming said faintly in midair. As his voice echoed in the air, the presence of the strongest person in the aeon swept through the world, and a voice that caused the entire true world to tremble tumbled out of Su Ming's mouth. As the air around him distorted, it turned into a huge hand that went to seize the blood-red figure. Madness appeared in the blood-red figure's eyes. He formed a seal with his hands and pointed forward. Immediately, the air around him distorted. Blood fog surged into the sky, and the roars of malicious spirits came from it. The blood fog turned into a ferocious face of a ghost that charged towards the hand. Once they crashed into each other, a loud bang that shook the sky and earth erupted. The hand shattered, and the face of the ghost let out a shrill scream before it crumbled. Su Ming swung his arm, and a freezing glare appeared in his eyes. The blood-red figure moved and took a few steps back again. When he lifted his head, he glared at Su Ming. A crazed, ferocious smile appeared on his lips, as if he did not care even if he was at a disadvantage. As expected of the strongest person in this aeon, but aren't you a little too conceited? You don't have the right to make me continue sleeping. You can't kill me, and not even Arid Triad's disaster can destroy me. All those who have reached our level are already undying. As the blood-red figure laughed madly, he lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the sky. Five-faced beast deity, descend upon this aeon. As the blood-red figure spoke, the world roared. A huge crack tore through space out of nowhere with loud rumbles. A boundless, malicious presence instantly surged out of the crack. Within it were 5 mighty pressures that could be clearly sensed intersecting with each other, and they were incredibly astonishing. This was the famous five-faced beast deity from the previous aeon. It was the famous five-faced beast deity from the previous aeon. That beast was not refined by a cultivator, but born from the essences of the world. When it appeared, it was in Avicania realm, and it devoured countless cultivators. It stirred up a disaster in the previous aeon, and countless living beings died. Even if all the powerful warriors from the true world gathered together, the beast still managed to defeat them one by one, and the more it devoured, the stronger it became. In the end, it gained intelligence, and its level of cultivation reached its peak. During that period of time, it could be said to be invincible. The beast threw its head back and roared. It sensed the existence of arid Triad's will, which was why it went to challenge it. In that battle, it lost completely. Its physical body was crushed, and its soul scattered. It was destroyed by arid Triad's will, but even though its real body had died, during the thousands of years after that aeon, cultivators gradually began to sense its fragmented soul. When more cultivators like this appeared, the five-faced beast deity cult was born. The people in that cult were all people who had killed monstrous amounts of people. They were ruthless and merciless, and they worshipped the five-faced beast deity. They built a statue and worshipped it every single day. As time passed, the leaders of the cult gradually became able to summon the shadow of the five-faced beast deity, but most of them only had one head. At most, they could summon 3 heads. However, just 3 heads was enough for them to obtain power equivalent to those in Avicania realm. During the end of that aeon, a peerless genius appeared in the five-faced beast deity cult. That person's potential could be said to be at the top, and he seemed to be born to fuse with the five-faced divine beast soul. He rose to power. In a short 10,000 years, he gathered together 3 heads of the five-faced beast deity. After that, he searched through the entire expanse cosmos and gathered together nearly 8/10 of the five-faced beast deity's soul, causing the shadow he summoned to be the first to appear in the universe after the five-faced beast deity died. He was the blood-red figure in front of them. He was the prodigy of the five-faced beast deity cult in the past, and he had fused with his other self to become an immortal and indestructible existence. Emo Ku. He had slaughtered so many people that he gained a great reputation in the previous aeon. He was one of the 2 strongest people in that aeon, and he had survived Arid Triad's disaster. It was a pity that he was forced to fall into deep sleep after just 100 years. During the 100 years of the new aeon, he had spent most of his time creating the legacy of the five-faced beast deity cult, which was why most of the later generations did not know of his existence. The crack that appeared in the world at that moment was a sign that the five-faced beast deity was about to appear. As the malicious presence spread out, a loud roar came from the crack. Soon after, a huge head appeared. It was the head of a ferocious beast that looked like a snake. As its red tongue flicked in and out of the snake's head, a piercing screech shot out of the crack like a bolt of lightning. That snake's head was the first head of the five-faced beast deity. It charged towards Su Ming and instantly closed in on the white-robed Su Ming. It occupied the world, and a foul stench that seemed to be able to corrode space came crashing into Su Ming's face, causing the world around him to immediately show signs of festering. Su Ming's expression was calm. This might be the first time he saw the true power of a powerful warrior from the previous aeon, but he was not wary in the slightest. As the strongest person in this aeon, Su Ming also wanted to see just who was the strongest among the powerful warriors for the previous aeon. The moment the huge snake's head closed in on him and the foul stench came crashing into his face, Su Ming let out a cold harumph. He lifted his right hand and swung it forward. With it, the world instantly roared, and a huge hand manifested in front of Su Ming. It seized the snake's head and lifted it upwards. At that moment, another roar came from the crack. A gigantic wolf's head rushed out, and with a presence that made it seem as if it wanted to devour the sky and earth, it opened its mouth and charged towards Su Ming in an instant. Immediately after, the third roar came from the crack in the sky. A huge tiger's head instantly appeared in the sky. The word king at the center of its brows was incredibly clear, and it exuded a supreme, domineering air. When it roared, a powerful wave of sound surged into the sky and shook the entire planet. And this was just the third head. At the instant the tiger's roar spread through the planet, the fourth head appeared. It was a huge dragon head that was entirely black. At the instant the fourth head appeared, the fifth head also appeared. It was the head of a boy with a distorted face. At the instant the boy's head appeared, he let out a piercing howl at Su Ming. A vast, mighty pressure shot through the five heads, and like a rune, they charged towards Su Ming from five directions. At the same time, as the five heads descended, the body of the five-faced beast divinity appeared in the rift in the sky. Shockingly, it was a humanoid body, extremely large, nearly 30,000 meters long. Only a portion of it was revealed, but that alone was enough to shock anyone who saw it. The five-faced beast deity has five heads, but I don't understand. Are you worthy of being called a deity? Su Ming stared at the five heads charging towards him ferociously. Each head gave Su Ming a feeling that they were equivalent to those in Avacania realm, but once they were connected together, a feeling that made Su Ming feel as if he was looking at the old man from Heavenly Spirit Tribe in the past erupted from him. It was a powerful presence equivalent to those who had gone through the 8 cycles of antecedental spirits. But before Su Ming, this sort of presence was not enough. After all, even though they were both the strongest in their respective eons, there was still a difference in strength between them. This was something that could not be the same. At the instant Su Ming's voice rang out and the five heads closed in on him, Su Ming seized the air with his right hand, and a purple sword appeared in his hand. It exuded an indescribably fierce presence. It was the end of Will's sword. The grade of the sword had once surpassed Su Ming's. It was the sword controlling the person, not the person controlling the sword, but the sword in Su Ming's hand was his weapon. It should have been impossible for the sword to cut off the five-faced beast deity's head, but when Su Ming held it in his hand, it could. A freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. With the sword in his right hand, he did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. In an instant, he was already right in front of the snake's head. At the instant the snake's head came to devour him, the purple light from his sword surged into the sky. It dazzled the eyes of all the cultivators who were paying attention to the battle. When the purple light reached a piercing degree and everything before their eyes turned dark, a shrill scream of pain tumbled out of the snake's mouth. Booms filled the air, and at the same time, a shrill howl could be heard, as if the beast was struggling in its death throes. The booms grew even more intense, and yet that wasn't the end of it. A third blood-curdling scream rang out, and the darkness in front of everyone's eyes faded away. When their vision returned to normal, they saw that of the five beasts in the sky, the snake's head had been severed, the wolf's head had fallen to the ground, and the tiger's head was glowing red, as if it had been stabbed by a sword. Shock appeared on the remaining dragon head and the boy's head at that instant. But before they could retreat, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand, pointed at it, and swung his arm. Immediately, the tiger head let out a scream of pain. As its head crumbled, purple light shone from within and disappeared without a trace from the dragon head and the boy's head in a flash. In an instant, purple light shone in front of Su Ming, and the end of Will's sword manifested. A drop of black blood fell from the tip of the sword, and the dragon head shuddered before it was cut off. The boy's head let out a roar filled with unwillingness to admit defeat. A slash mark appeared at the center of his brows, and with a bang, it was cut in half. The end of Will's sword shuddered in excitement. Ever since it was created, it had followed its strongest master and cut off the head of the strongest enemy it had ever met in its life. It had sucked in the blood of such a powerful warrior, which had stirred up its excitement and agitation. In fact, it could even sense that before long, it would be able to take another step forward. That's all the five-faced beast deity is capable of, Su Ming said faintly, then lifted his right hand and pushed at the giant who had lost its five heads. Go back to where you came from. Seal. Su Ming said those words faintly. There were only 7 words, but the crack in the sky immediately turned into a vortex. As it rotated with loud bangs, a great suction force spread out. No matter how the giant struggled, he could not change the fact that he was sucked into the vortex. As he was sucked in, the vortex disappeared, and the sky returned to normal. On the 4th day of the double monthly votes, I beg for monthly votes. Chapter 14:15. The area was instantly filled with dead silence. Nearly 1 million cultivators stared at Su Ming. Shock appeared on their faces, and their minds were blank. Only the scene of Su Ming sealing the giant's body remained in their hearts for eternity. The elder stared at Su Ming, and a smile appeared on his face. He had seen Su Ming's growth and how the young La Su of the past had grown to an unbelievable state. Yu Xian stared at Su Ming, and a gentle look appeared in her eyes. It was as if she could look at him for an entire lifetime, and she also hoped that she could look at him for an entire lifetime. Su Xianyi's face was pale. He stared at Su Ming, and his mind trembled. Su Ming's strength had surpassed his expectations time and time again, and the level of cultivation he showed at that moment already made his skin crawl in disbelief. The sovereign of Dawn, Yin Pei, was also careful. At that moment, he was madly cursing the other existences who were at the same level as him in Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire. He was cursing them, and he also deeply regretted choosing to be the first to descend. Only the third prince, or rather, Lei Chun, watched all of this quietly. His expression was still complicated, and he did not say a single word. What other tricks do you have? If you don't bring them out now, you won't have the chance anymore. Su Ming stared at the blood-red figure in the distance. When he spoke faintly, a low roar came from the blood-red figure. Damn it, I forgot about this. I neglected that you are a life from this aeon. When the blood-red figure said those words, a thought appeared in Su Ming's mind. At the same time, he lifted his hands, formed a seal, and swung them forward. Blood, malice, fiend. A deep, almost bizarre voice tumbled out of the blood-red figure's mouth. The blood fog around him tumbled about swiftly. When spread out, it turned into a huge blood-red vortex. A monstrous, malicious aura spread out from it, along with a powerful, murderous aura. First style Blood World activation. The blood-red figure let out a low roar and waved his hands. Immediately, a red ripple spread out with him as the center. This was a divine art that belonged only to him, and it was a famous art from the previous aeon. In fact, this art had made him invincible in the previous world. There were 4 styles in this art, and this was the first style. Once the red ripple spread through the entire planet, it shuddered. When Su Ming looked over, his world turned blood-red. All the figures around him turned into blood-red shadows, as if he was in a blood-red hell. The thick stench of blood and the shockingly thick murderous aura seemed to have formed a world, and the power of that world was used to suppress Su Ming. This technique is quite interesting. Su Ming looked around him. When he spoke, he lifted his right hand and pointed at the sky. A vast will instantly descended from his body. As Su Ming slowly moved his right hand and drew a circle, his will started rotating in an invisible manner. When it turned into a huge circle, a cold sneer appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. Su Jia, Su Ming said faintly. He had imitated Arid Triad's disaster and cast the disaster that was named after him. The moment he spoke, the red bolt of lightning shot out from the circle and charged into the sky above the blood-red world. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth, and the second and third calamities, the 5 colors and 6 wills, appeared in the span of a breath. The world trembled. The blood-red world shattered to pieces. The blood-red figure coughed up a mouthful of blood, and the blood-red light on his body became slightly duller. When he moved back, he quickly formed a seal with his hands, pointed forward, and let out a shrill roar. Second style, Blood Reincarnation C. At the instant he said those words, booming sounds surged into the sky. The crumbling blood-red world instantly shattered and turned into a huge vortex that started rotating with loud rumbles. It was red, and it seemed to have formed an invisible connection with the vortex around the blood-red figure, turning into the Blood Reincarnation Sea, just as the figure had said. As the sea of blood in the vortex tumbled about, it charged towards Su Ming. In an instant, it surrounded him, and as it spun rapidly, it submerged him. At the instant it did so, the blood-red figure laughed ferociously, but the moment it appeared, it froze. A loud bang came from the reincarnation sea of blood. Su Ming's fourth disaster and fifth disaster caused the reincarnation sea of blood to crumble. Damn it, damn it. Third form, eternal existence, born in my epic. 18 Bloody Yama. Show yourselves. The blood-red figure's voice was hoarse and shrill. At the instant he spoke, 18 statues appeared in the crumbling blood reincarnation sea. The 18 statues were entirely crimson, and their expressions were all different. At that moment, as if they had melted, they swiftly came to life and turned into 18 figures that charged towards Su Ming. Eighth disaster. When Su Ming said those words flatly, an endless amount of lightning instantly spread out with him as the center. In the blink of an eye, it crashed into the 18 figures. Booming sounds tumbled about and spread in all directions, and the blood-red figure threw his head back and let out a roar. Fourth-style Blood God's skull. As he spoke, not a single hint of blood-red light could be seen around the blood-red figure. In fact, his body was revealed. He was a young man dressed in a red robe with a pale face. He had long red hair, and madness and killing intent shone in his eyes. All the blood-red light, the collapsing vortex of the sea of blood, and the 18 statues that were tumbling backwards due to Su Ming's eighth disaster fused together at that instant. As the sea of blood rotated, it rose from its flat position to turn into a gigantic head. 3 of the statues became the left eye, and another 3 became the right eye. 3 became the nose, 3 became the mouth, and 6 became the ears. The blood reincarnation sea became the skull, and the membrane of the blood expanse cosmos became the skin of the skull, forming the head of the blood god that had a malicious aura surging into the heavens. Almost at the instant the head of the blood god appeared, Su Ming did not give it much time to react. His pupils shrank slightly, and for the first time in his life, he felt threatened by a powerful warrior from the previous aeon. Without any hesitation, he took a step forward. When he lifted his right hand, 30 million great berserker souls gathered together to form a strong right hand. Another 30 million great berserker souls gathered together to form his right hand. At the instant he took a step forward, he completed the God of Berserker's transformation. Once the God of Berserker's transformation was completed, Su Ming's level of cultivation increased exponentially. His body also became much larger. When his foot landed, he appeared right in front of the head of the blood god. He lifted his right hand, and without any hesitation, he hurled a punch forward. Boom, boom, boom. In just a few short breaths, Su Ming threw thousands of punches in succession. Each punch contained Su Ming's will and his cultivation base. He wanted to destroy his opponent's killing move within the shortest amount of time possible. This was Su Ming's plan. In just a few breaths, a loud bang that shook the sky and earth shot out. The gigantic head of the blood god crumbled into pieces and tumbled backwards. Su Ming moved, and like an afterimage that was difficult to see with the naked eye, he charged towards the young man who no longer had any blood-red light and had a pale face. At the instant the head of the blood god shattered, the young man coughed up a huge mouthful of blood and staggered a few steps backwards. When he lifted his head, Su Ming's fist was already at the center of his brows. "You can't kill me." With a crazed expression on his face, the young man lifted his hands and struck the center of his brows. "Blood offering to the world." Once he said those words, the expressions of the 1 million cultivators from the Emperor of Abyss True World below changed drastically. The blood in their bodies flowed in reverse, and in an instant, 300,000 cultivators exploded with a bang. Their blood gushed out and charged towards the young man. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. He punched the center of the young man's brows, and with a loud bang, the young man was thrown away. Blood gushed out, but his body did not crumble. Instead, he laughed ferociously and roared, "You can't kill me." With a bang, the remaining 700,000 cultivators on the ground exploded at the same time. With their deaths as the price, a large amount of blood gathered together and charged towards the young man in the sky. In an instant, it fused with him, causing a blood-red light to shine on his body again. Even his pale face seemed to have recovered quite a bit. I can't kill you, but I can seal you. The killing intent in Su Ming's eyes grew stronger. The god of berserkers' transformation instantly disappeared, and he lifted his right hand to point at the blood-red figure. True Morning Dao World Will. With a bang, the entire will of True Morning Dao World instantly descended on the blood-red figure, causing his body to freeze, but his laughter was still as arrogant as ever. True Morning Dao World Will. Su Ming let out a cold harumph. He pointed forward again, and this time, the blood-red figure's laughter came to an abrupt halt. His body sank 1,000 feet, but it was only 1,000 feet before he stopped sinking. His arrogant laughter echoed in the air again. You don't have the right to seal me. Even if you're the strongest in this aeon, and even if you have the advantage of this aeon, you can't do it. Sky Hills will. Su Ming laughed coldly. He pushed down with his right hand again, and booming sounds surged into the sky. The blood-red figure's laughter came to an abrupt halt, and shock appeared on his face. His body sank tens of thousands of feet, and he was instantly suppressed on the surface of the sea beneath him. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not continue sinking. A freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. Before the blood-red figure could say anything, he lifted his right hand and lifted the sky as if he was lifting a curtain. Change the underworld emperor's sky. Su Ming's voice echoed in the planet, the galaxy around him, and all of the Emperor of Abyss True World. During that instant, the feeble struggles and resistance from the Emperor of Abyss True World were instantly swept away and suppressed. Once they were wiped off, the Emperor of Abyss True World was occupied by Su Ming's will, turning it into his Emperor of Abyss True World. It was just as Su Ming had said, this place had indeed been changed. The will of the Underworld Emperor. The instant Su Ming said those words, he pushed his right hand downwards, and a shrill scream of pain immediately tumbled out of the blood-red figure's mouth. Impossible. That's absolutely impossible. You have the advantage of an era. You're a being of this era, which is why you're stronger than me. But once your era is destroyed, you'll lose your advantage. Let's see if you'll still be a match for me. I will wait for that day to come. I will wait for you to see everyone around you die. When the next era comes, you will lose your advantage. At that time, you and I will fight again. With a bang, the blood-red figure's shrill voice echoed in the air. His body was forcefully suppressed and sank into the bottom of the sea. He sank into the crack and was sealed once again. Are there still monthly votes? Chapter 14:16. This scene shook the world. The sovereign of Don Yin Pei sucked in a sharp breath. When he looked at Su Ming, great wariness and shock appeared on his face. He originally thought that Su Ming was evenly matched against the blood-red figure, but in the end, the blood-red figure was suppressed by Su Ming. To the sovereign of Don Yin Pei, between suppressing and destroying, there was no doubt that suppressing was more difficult. He has indeed become the strongest person in this aeon. There is no one who can compare to him. The sovereign of Don Yin Pei mumbled. Su Xian, he watched all of this with a pale face. His eyes sparkled, and his expression turned incredibly dark. The blood-red figure was his greatest secret, but even if he had been summoned, he was not Su Ming's opponent. This caused Su Xianyi's dark expression to turn into a broken smile. He did not care about the deaths of the 1 million cultivators. Even if all the people from the Emperor of Abyss True World died, he would not show even a hint of pity. The only thing he felt was anguish. Su Ming had become so strong at some unknown point of time. With the wills of the 4 great true worlds fused together, Su Ming's power of suppressing and sealing the blood-red figure was just a little short of Arid Triad's power. Because of that, there was no way the blood-red figure could fight against it. With crazed roars, curses, and a powerful murderous aura, as well as an unwillingness to admit defeat, his body was suppressed back into the crack in the ground. He was sent back to the place where he slept. It was just as Su Ming had said. At that moment, it was not time for him to wake up. No matter what method the blood-red figure used to make him wake up ahead of time, he still could not avoid the fate of continuing to sleep. Su Ming could not kill him. This was something he had sensed earlier. It did not matter whether it was his divine abilities or his will. When they landed on the blood-red figure, they seemed to be separated by a membrane, causing most of his power to be weakened in an unseen manner. It was as if that membrane was the passage of time and the laws between eons. That was why, as the strongest in this aeon, Su Ming could seal the blood-red figure, but he could not kill him. Unless Su Ming stared at the sea, and a freezing glare shone in his eyes, but it soon disappeared. He could sense that there was a different passage of time between him and the powerful warrior from the previous aeon. It was as if they were in two different worlds. Unless the expanse cosmos he resided in was destroyed in the disaster and the new aeon arrived, the membrane between Su Ming and the blood-red figure would no longer exist. At that time, it would be easy for him to kill that person. However, Su Ming would rather not have this sort of ending. In silence, he looked into the depths of the sea. This time, he could only seal the body of the red figure. The cracks on the ground were still there, and the blood of the 1,000,000 dead cultivators still dyed the sky red. Su Ming sighed softly. Even if the cultivators in this place were cultivators from the Emperor of Abyss True World and had practically no relationship with him, once he occupied the Emperor of Abyss True World and became the will of the Emperor of Abyss True World, the people in this true world were no longer unrelated to Su Ming. When he shook his head, Su Ming lifted his right hand and swung it forward. "Time," Su Ming said faintly. As the Abyss Builder's strongest inborn ability, the art to reverse time was executed swiftly in Su Ming's hands with a great will that was only second to Arid Triad's. When he executed this art, it was clear that it was much stronger than Su Xianyi's. With a swing of his arm, countless threads appeared on the entire cultivation planet. They were like ripples that flowed about slowly, as if they were the threads of life. At that moment, most of the threads were in pieces. They surrounded each other to form a rotating vortex, but at that moment, the vortex shuddered and swiftly moved in reverse. As it moved in reverse, the threads gradually connected with each other. Gradually, the blood that had drifted about in the sky of the cultivation planet disappeared and was previously destroyed appeared and charged towards the ancient tree. The broken bodies of the 1,000,000 cultivators on the tree crown also completed the reversal of time. Once the bodies of the 1,000,000 cultivators were complete, a large amount of blood charged over from the sky and returned to each cultivator's body. In the end, the cultivators' eyes instantly turned from lifeless to a sparkle that contained life. Their hearts and bodies trembled, and it was as if they had woken up from a nightmare. The art to reverse life and death, to create life. At the instant Su Ming executed this art, the young man under the ancient tree lifted his head and cast a calm glance at the area above him. It was as if his gaze was everywhere and could see everything he wanted to see. "He does look a little like me in the past," the young man said softly. When he averted his gaze, the scene of their deaths appeared in the minds of the 1,000,000 cultivators on the tree crown. Then, shock and astonishment appeared on their faces, and they stared at Su Ming in a daze. Su Ming's expression was calm. He lowered his head to look at the crack that stretched from the sea to the ground in the distance. He lifted his right hand and pushed at the crack. The art of time was executed in reverse in Su Ming's hand again. As the power of time filled the entire planet, the crack closed up at an incredible speed. There was no more crack in the sea, and the ground became one. The mountains that had collapsed because of the crack and everything else that had been crushed returned to normal at that instant, as if the crack had never been there. The others could tell who was stronger with just one glance compared to the art of time, Su Xian, he had executed previously, because the difference was too stark. When the ground closed up and there was no longer any crack in the sea, Su Ming's art of time did not end. Instead, it continued flowing in reverse until it reached Su Xian, causing time to return to the instant before he coughed up blood and fell back to summon the blood-red figure. When time returned to that instant, Su Ming turned around swiftly. The end of Will's sword in his hand shone with a monstrous purple light. It shone with a piercing light and seemed to have fused with Su Ming's body. When he took a step forward, he was like a purple arc that shot through the air and charged towards Su Xianyi. Su Xianyi moved back with a pale face. There was anguish on his face, but there was no unwillingness to admit defeat. There was only anguish and regret. He watched Su Ming closing in on him and watched death descend upon him. He sighed softly, and his expression gradually became calm. He remembered his wife in the fifth kiln, remembered Su Zhan, remembered the baby whose body and soul he had gathered together in the shattered space of the fifth true world in the past. It was as if all of this was a dream from his previous life. When he looked at it at that moment, for some unknown reason, a hint of complicated feelings rose in Su Xianyi's heart. Perhaps those complicated feelings had always been there, but due to his madness to rise to power as an abyss builder, he had ignored them and forcefully suppressed them. He thought that he no longer had those complicated feelings, but only at that moment did he realize that those complicated feelings had always been there. My wife is asleep, my son is filled with resentment, my best friend died in battle, and my son became a saint. Su Xianyi mumbled. All his thoughts had fused into that soft sigh, and it echoed in his heart. Am I wrong? This was not the first time Su Xianyi had said these words, but only this time did he ask himself this question. I'm not wrong. The calm expression on Su Xianyi's face was immediately replaced by determination. The complicated feelings and confusion from before changed at that instant. I'm not wrong, and I'm definitely not wrong either. The path I want to take isn't for myself, but for the Abyss Builders to rise to power and for the fifth true world to reappear. I am not wrong at all. Even if I am wrong, there is no such thing as a gentleman when it comes to achieving great things. I sacrificed my wife, sacrificed my best friend, and you, Su Ming. All of this is your fate because I'm not wrong. Even if I die in this disaster, I, Su Xianyi, have never been wrong. Su Xianyi's heart raced, and determination appeared on his face. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, it only lasted for an instant. When Su Ming's sword charged forward and closed in on Su Xianyi had already recovered from his momentary daze. He stared at the purple light on Su Ming's sword. It looked as if it wanted to become everything in Su Xianyi's eyes, but in the end, he could not do it because ambition burned in Su Xianyi's eyes, along with the untamed pride of being a formidable person. It was a confidence that, even if he was afraid of death, he would still die standing. He would not believe that he was wrong. It was the strongest light that shone in his life once he reached his level of cultivation. Su Ming stared at Su Xianyi. At the instant his sword closed in on him, he came to an abrupt halt, because the third prince, or rather, Lei Chun appeared out of thin air before the tip of his sword. He blocked Su Ming's sword and stood in front of him to protect him. Lei Chun fell silent, and Su Ming also fell silent. The two of them stared at each other. They were separated by a sword, but it was as if they were separated by an aeon. It was as if everything that had happened during their childhood had turned into the distance of this sword. Thank you, Su Ming said softly after a long while. She's your woman. I knew you would come. Lei Chun looked at Su Ming and sighed softly. Thank you, Su Ming said again. He's also my elder. You don't have to thank me. Lei Chun fell silent, then shook his head. Others might not understand Su Ming's two different thanks, but Lei Chun did. The first thanks was for letting his elder take Yu Xian away. The second thanks was for gathering a wisp of Lei Chun's divine sense with the elder while his elder was bound by the threads of time. Su Ming would not let anything happen to his elder, even if he was a sovereign of dawn. The others might not be able to see it, but at the instant Su Ming saw his elder, he sensed Lei Chun's divine sense on him. Su Ming remained silent for a moment. He stared at Lei Chun, and a complicated expression appeared on his face. He spoke again. Thank you. This time, Lei Chun did not answer. Instead, he fell silent. He knew that Su Ming was thanking him for not telling the others about him in harmonious Morris Alba Expanse Cosmos. The two halves the red figure had mentioned previously were Su Ming and his elder, and the other was Lei Chun. Lei Chun was the same as Su Ming. He had also fused with his other self from the other expanse cosmos. He had the right to move between the two expanse cosmoses, and the disaster would not destroy him. On the 5th day of the double monthly votes, do you still have your monthly votes? Chapter 14:17. He was once his best friend, his childhood friend. Su Ming, I'm telling you, in the future, I, Lei Chun, will become the tribe leader of Dark Mountain Tribe. You have to work hard to become the elder. At that time, if anyone dares to bully us, it's fine even if you can't reach the Berserker realm. Don't worry, Lei Chun will protect you in the future. Su Ming, what do you think of this girl? I think I quite like her. Will our future change? The words that echoed in his memories were now a sword away from him, and they made him sigh softly in the midst of the complicated emotions in his heart. Lei Chun's expression was no longer complicated. He looked at Su Ming with clear eyes and said softly, "He's my father. I won't kill him." Su Ming was silent. After a long while, he spoke softly. No matter how strong his killing intent was, with Lei Chun around, Su Ming could not bring himself to attack. In truth, from the moment he saw Lei Chun in harmonious Morris Alba expanse cosmos, Su Ming had already come to some conclusions, because he had sensed the presence of the other half of the seed of life extermination that Su Xian he had taken away. When he stepped into the Emperor of Abyss true world, all the answers were revealed. It was naturally impossible for Yu Xian to be Su Xian Yi's son. She was only the wife Su Xian he had prepared for his son, a vessel to nourish the other half of the seed of life extermination. She was the same as Su Ming. Then it could only be the third prince who had appeared beside Yu Xian at that moment to hold the wedding ceremony, Lei Chun. He was Su Xian Yi's true son. Lei Chun looked at Su Ming. Once he heard his words, he closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, Su Ming took a step forward and instantly shot through Lei Chun's body to appear in front of Su Xian. He swung the sword in his right hand. Purple light surged into the sky and instantly dyed the world purple. When it disappeared, Su Xian Yi's face turned pale, and he staggered a few steps backwards. Purple light spread out from his body, and his expression turned even more sour. He could clearly sense that as the purple light spread out, his body was becoming weaker. At that moment, Su Ming's will swept through the area and turned into a sharp will that pierced Su Xian Yi's mind through his eyes. Su Xian, he seemed to have turned into Venus pathways. As Su Ming's will pierced into them, purple light spread out along them. During the first instant, there was a cave abode in a tall mountain on a remote cultivation planet in the Emperor of Abyss true world. There was a figure dressed in a long robe sitting in it. At that moment, when he lifted his head, an old face was revealed, but there was purple light shining in his eyes. He was one of Su Xian Yi's clones. At that moment, purple light shone in his eyes, and an invisible hand stretched out from the purple light to push down on the top of the old man's skull. He could not dodge it, and with a loud bang, the old man's body shuddered before he disappeared into thin air. His body and soul were destroyed. During the second instant, in a huge group of palaces in true Sacredine world was a middle-aged man with an awe-inspiring expression. He stared at the people beneath him coldly, and just as he was about to say something, his body suddenly jolted, and purple light surged into the sky from his eyes. Under the astonished gazes of the cultivators beneath him, Su Ming's hand stretched out from the purple light and casually pushed down on the center of the middle-aged man's brows. A loud bang reverberated in the air, and the middle-aged man's body shuddered before he shattered into pieces. During the third instant, in the huge vortex in the depths of the Emperor of Abyss true world was a place where a new origin spirit was about to be born. It did not matter whether it was Su Xian Yi's real body or his clone. At that moment, his body shuddered. He did not open his eyes, as if he knew that once he did, purple light would spread out. The figure moved, and just as he was about to leave, purple light spread out from his body. It turned into Su Ming's gentle palm, which he could not dodge. When it landed on his forehead, cracking sounds of his forehead shattering inch by inch reverberated in the air. Once the purple light disappeared, everything turned into nothingness. During the fourth instant, beside Su Xianyi's wife's corpse in the fifth kiln, was the aloof man who had been meditating quietly for many years. At that moment, he sighed softly and opened his eyes, allowing the purple light in his eyes to envelop the space around him. He simply allowed Su Ming's hand to appear in the purple light and press down on the center of his brows. His years of protection came to an end on that day. During the fifth instant, in an incredibly dangerous place located even further away from Black Ink Planet and Divine Essence Star Ocean, was an old man with disheveled hair. He was thin and shriveled, and there was a thick aura of death spreading out from his body. He was sitting cross-legged in a rune. That rune was incredibly ancient, as if it was a seal that suppressed everything within it. The old man seemed to be surrounded by an aura of death, but there was a hint of life force within him that never disappeared. However, this was not what was strange about the old man. The truly bizarre thing was that there was a mummy lying behind him. That mummy had been dead for an unknown number of years, but it was stuck tightly to the old man's back, constantly absorbing the old man's life force. It would even absorb the aura of death, as if it was a parasite. There was pain on the old man's face, as if he had been living like this for an unknown number of years. However, at that instant, the old man's eyes flew open. There was no panic in the purple light in his eyes, only crazed joy that seemed to have been waiting for a long time. As the purple light shone, Su Ming's right hand shot out from the depths of the rune and pressed down on the center of the old man's brows. The old man forced down the excitement in his heart and did not dodge, simply allowing the palm formed by Su Ming's will to crush the old man's body to pieces. His body and soul were destroyed when the purple light disappeared. The masterless mummy opened its eyes and let out a piercing, crazed roar filled with ruthlessness and madness towards the rune. The sixth instant, the seventh instant. Su Xianyi's clones were all crushed by Su Ming's will at that instant. They were completely wiped off, leaving behind only the body that was retreating with an increasingly pale face. Su Ming did not wipe off that body. He had promised Lei Chun that he would let Su Xianyi live. But as for how he could survive, Su Ming chose to wipe off all of Su Xianyi's clones. Even if Su Xianyi's real body was among them, to Abyss Builders, even if their real bodies died, their clones could still use some unique methods to survive. Once he finished doing all of this, Su Ming cast a glance at Su Xian, whose level of cultivation had plummeted to Heaven Cultivation Realm due to the death of all his clones. He shook his head, turned around, and walked towards Yu Xian. When he returned to her side, Su Ming tapped the center of her brows lightly with his right hand. Yu Xian still stared at Su Ming. She did not move away and simply allowed his finger to land on her. Su Ming's will surged into her body, and once it circulated through her body once, the seed of life extermination, which looked like half a ship, was extracted from Yu Xian's body after Su Ming cut off his connection with her. When Su Ming saw the large number of squirming tentacles surrounding the seed of life extermination when it was brought out, disgust appeared on his face. He had also had this item in the past. Once he brought it out, he flung it at Lei Chun. The half of the seed of life extermination charged towards Lei Chun. At the instant it touched him, it fused into his body and perfectly fused with the other half of the seed of life extermination that Su Ming had been nourishing in Lei Chun's body at that moment, and it became complete. Since your father has done everything he can to obtain this item and has fused with you, then from now on, we will not be able to sort out the grudges between us, be it gratitude or resentment. It would be better for us to let the past go with the wind and let our memories turn into nothing. Su Ming cast Lei Chun a deep glance, then pulled Yu Xian to stand in front of his elder. Once he bowed to Yu Xian with her, the elder smiled. "Elder, let's go home," Su Ming said softly. The elder's smile became even more amiable. He nodded, and the three of them stepped into the air. When they walked out of the ancient tree, Su Ming's low voice reached the sovereign of Don Yanpei's ears. 10 years later, wait for me at Arid Triad's Gap. Lei Chun stared at Su Ming's back with a dejected expression. Su Ming. Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt. When he turned his head around, Lei Chen's voice traveled into his ears with an indecipherable tone. I will tell you the answer I gave you in the past now. I don't want to change. Lei Chen shuddered lightly. He stared at his companion, his best friend, and mumbled under his breath. But you have already changed. There seemed to be a profound look in Su Ming's eyes, as if he had seen through everything. Perhaps he had not noticed much when Su Ming came, but when the red figure appeared, Su Ming already knew his answer. In the end, he destroyed Su Xianyi's clone. Instead of saying that he had ended his grudge, it would be more accurate to say that it was part of Su Xianyi's plan. He wanted to use Su Ming's power to cut off Su Xianyi's predicament. As for whether Lei Chen had told Su Xianyi that Su Ming had gone to Harmonious Morris Alba, Su Ming did not want to think about it. It was just as he said, he would treat it as nothing. From then on, they would be strangers, and if Lei Chen did not provoke him, he would not meet him. This is the Su Xianyi I know. When Su Ming turned his head around, he swept his gaze past Lei Chen. He saw Su Xianyi, who had a calm expression, but whose eyes contained the same profound look as Su Ming's own. The two of them met each other's gazes for an instant. Su Ming left with Yu Xian and his elder. He walked out of the tree crown. Behind him, the 1,000,000 cultivators wrapped their fists in their palms and bowed to him. They were bowing to Su Ming for saving their lives. Wait! Once Su Ming walked out of the ancient tree, the 1,000,000 cultivators bowed to him. Lei Chen had a gloomy and complicated look on his face, and Su Xianyi's calm and profound gaze froze again. He turned his head around, but this time he did not look at the tree crown. Instead, he looked at the elegant young man beside the ancient tree. At that moment, the young man was looking at Su Ming. At the instant their gazes met, a smile appeared on Su Ming's face. He looked at the young man, the sea, and the ancient tree before he spoke softly to Yu Xian and his elder. I'm going to meet an elder. Wait for me for a while. As Su Ming spoke, he walked towards the ancient tree. A smile appeared on the young man's face as he watched Su Ming walk over. This scene took place beyond the sea, and the ancient tree was so green that it seemed to connect to the sky. Chapter 14:18. Beyond the sea, beside the ancient tree, there was so much green that it seemed to connect to the sky. The waves shone brilliantly. The sea of clouds was vast. Where was the end of the world, the ancient tree grew old, and the shadows of people grew old. Who was before the passage of time? Perhaps there was someone. It was the young man under the tree. With a warm smile, he stared at Su Ming walking towards him. Perhaps it was Su Ming who was watching the person under the tree. Once he got closer, he felt as if he was walking over from the ancient aeon. With each step he took, he moved through countless eons and returned to the past, to the vast universe of the past. It was as if the sky had stopped moving and everything in the world had stopped. All of this was because Su Ming and the person under the tree were destined to meet. It was just like night and day. They could not see each other. Only during dusk and dawn could they see each other's figures. But they were indistinct, just like how night could not see the noon sky, and just like how day could not see the darkness in the depths of midnight. But perhaps there would come a day when night and day would meet, and at that moment, the young man under the tree would be like Su Ming. Soon, there were two people under the tree. The sky and the sea in the distance might not have moved, but the setting sun was there. It swayed as if it was about to set. The last rays of light scattered through the sea and turned into Su Ming and the young man's figures. They appeared on the surface of the sea, and their shadows were stretched out, very, very long. Su Ming stared at the young man, and the young man stared back at him. At the instant their gazes met, Su Ming saw an endless, ancient, and profound look, as well as a hint of fatigue that would not disappear from the depths of his gaze. That fatigue seemed to be the natural exhaustion of a person who had lived for far too long. This person did not want to hide it, and neither did he know how to hide it. His entire life was contained in his gaze. If someone understood it, then they would understand the world, but if they did not, then they would not be able to see him. It was just like Yu Xian at that moment. She could not see the young man under the tree. Elder Emo Sang might have looked as calm as ever, but his heart was trembling furiously at that instant. He could not see the young man's body, but he could see two long shadows under the reflection of the tree on the surface of the sea. The two shadows swayed with the light from the waves. They would occasionally shatter, and at other times, they would be complete. It was as if the rise and fall of the galaxy, the rise and fall of all the people in the world, and the Tao of life were contained within them. It was as if life was actually very simple. It was just a reflection on the surface of the sea, a shadow that swayed along with the waves. At a glance, it was just a shadow, but at a closer look, the ripples of the shadow represented a lifetime. It was more like the moment when night and day met. They were like fire and water, but strangely, they could tolerate each other. It was a kind of collapse and completeness formed by an invisible collision. Understood. After a long time, the smile on the young man's face did not fade. He spoke gently, and his voice was not harsh at all. It was as gentle as a friend, as a relative, as an elder. This was a question. Perhaps at that moment, some people would answer that they did not understand, and perhaps others would answer that they understood. However, the moment these two types of answers were spoken, they would fall into a lower position. In fact, if the young man under the tree's question was compared to a divine ability, then at that moment, he had already revealed it. If you answered that you didn't understand, you would be controlled by the will of the youth under the tree. If you answered that you understood, you would also unknowingly become one with the will of the youth under the tree. With just one sentence and one divine ability, killing intent would never appear, and no one would notice it. Only that gentle smile was in truth the most unfathomable thought in all of arid triad expanse cosmos. What about you? Su Ming was silent. After some time, a smile appeared on his face as well, and he asked faintly. There was no respect in his voice, neither was there the gentleness of a senior, and neither was there any unnecessary respect from a junior. It was just a tone used between equals. It was very faint, but it was also real. It was a rhetorical question. He did not answer whether Su Ming understood or not, but this answer made praise appear in the eyes of the young man under the tree for the first time. He admired Su Ming for not running away, but answering his question without being controlled by his will. Instead, he asked a rhetorical question. It was a simple rhetorical question. Perhaps the others would not be able to see much of the underlying meaning behind it. But in the eyes of a young man under the tree, this sort of rhetorical question was perhaps something that only Su Ming could ask in his current condition. It might seem normal, but it was definitely extraordinary. It might seem as if many people could do it, but in this sort of situation, perhaps they would only be led away from the initiative by the words of others without realizing it. This was also what the young man under the tree had intentionally done. You don't understand. The smile on the young man's face remained. He stared at Su Ming, and when he did so, he shook his head. Su Ming stared at the young man under the tree. He did not speak, but watched the setting sun in the distance gradually grow weaker, as if it was about to be devoured by the sea. This scene was like a picture that would cause all those who saw it to be moved by it, and they would definitely focus their gazes on it. When the sun sets, everything in the world will turn black. You don't understand the darkness of night, and you don't understand why all lives will close their eyes in the dark. You also don't understand why all lives will open their eyes when the sun rises. That's why you don't understand the brilliance of the calamity. That's why you are afraid. But the more afraid you are, the more you want to see with your own eyes, your family, your friends, everything around you, never to open their eyes again in the darkness. The young man under the tree spoke gently. If it was anyone else, perhaps they would not be able to understand him, but Su Ming, who knew his identity, could understand him. Everything is destined, as if it was destined that I would come here and see you. The young man under the tree cast Su Ming a deep glance. As his voice echoed in the air, when he looked over from the setting sun in the distance, he found that most of it had already sunk to the bottom of the sea. Su Ming smiled. He looked at the young man before him, and his smile was as calm as water. Perhaps we are destined to meet here, and it is also destined that our meeting this time will be the setting sun. If I chase after the setting sun, then tell me, will the setting sun fall in my eyes, or will it never fall? When Su Ming said these words, The young man's eyes focused again. If it falls, is it because I'm not fast enough? Or is it because this setting sun is destined to fall? If it doesn't fall, then once I chase after it for a certain amount of time, do you think this setting sun will be the setting sun we see? Or will it be the rising sun that will appear tomorrow? Or do you think that as I chase after it, will the sky be black or white? Su Ming asked 4 questions in a row, and at the instant he said them, the young man's eyes focused 4 times. Their conversation was filled with wisdom. There was no killing intent, but it was a battle of wills that was similar to Tao seeking. That's why it's not that I don't understand, but that you don't understand. At the moment I saw this tree, I knew that when you think you are you are not you. When you think you are not you, only then will you be you, Su Ming said languidly while looking at the young man under the tree. The young man under the tree fell silent. After a long while, he sighed softly. Your appearance has indeed exceeded my expectations. I've been asleep for too long, so much so that I've forgotten many things. Are you certain that you want to work together with it and possess me? The young man looked at Su Ming. His voice was as gentle as ever, but the smile on his face had already disappeared. Su Ming fell silent. The path you want to walk is different from mine, he said softly. There is no such thing as the same path, but as long as there is a path, then all paths will eventually fuse together and become Tao, the young man said faintly. The universe is heartless, and a disaster will descend on all lives. If that's the case, then it is only right that the world be destroyed. If you were me, you would do the same. The young man under the tree swung his arm, and the sky of the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World immediately darkened. Everything became still, and a vortex that only Su Ming and the young man could see appeared in the sky. No one else could notice it. The vortex spun without a sound. There were lightning bolts swimming in it. They intersected with each other and collided with each other. Each time they formed a spark, it would seem as if the law of the universe was contained within it. As the sparks rose and fell, it was as if a huge, flourishing flower had bloomed in the vortex in the sky. Su Ming lifted his head and stared at each of the sparks in the vortex. When his gaze focused on one of them, he saw the rise and fall of an aeon, the deaths of all lives, their unwillingness to admit defeat, and their resentment and anger towards the world. Each spark was clearly an aeon. What you see is the despair before the disaster of each aeon. No matter which aeon it is the same despair. This is the heartless world. Only when it is completely destroyed will there be no more disasters. The young man under the tree did not speak with any excitement. From the start until the end, his voice was calm and gentle. Even if there was a sharp tone in his words, they were still gentle, and no one would dislike him in the slightest. Instead, they would listen to him carefully and understand the true meaning behind his words. I will walk down this path alone. I cannot be alone for long. Are you willing to walk down this path with me and possess the world? From then on, we will make sure that the disasters will no longer happen and that all lives will no longer be destroyed by the universe. Instead, we will control our own fates. This is the oath I swore on the tree in the past. This is the will I possess, harmonious Morris Alba, and turn this expanse cosmos into arid triad. I am arid triad. I am the master of this expanse cosmos and the ancestor of all wills. If you follow my footsteps, then even if the disaster descends, I will make sure that true morning Tao world will not be destroyed. The young man under the tree looked at Su Ming. When he spoke slowly, he lifted his head. An indescribable, mighty pressure instantly spread out from his body. It was as if he was the master of the entire universe. It was as if with a flip of his hand, the sky would turn dark, and when he swung his arm, the galaxy would retreat with the force of shattering. Su Ming's pupil shrank. The young man under the tree's final words caused him to lift his head and stare at arid triad's descending body for a long, long time. The update is late. I've been away for the past few days, but I'll make sure that the update is complete. In truth, it came out on the 1st. Look, it hasn't stopped for 6 days, right? I'm writing the 2nd chapter right now. so don't be anxious. Chapter 1419. I need to think about it, Su Ming said slowly after some time. His expression was incredibly solemn. You should have thought about this carefully. Oh well, I will give you a time limit of 100 years. If you think about it carefully, you will naturally be able to sense my existence. During those 100 years, you cannot possess any other true world, or else I will seal you. And the price of sealing you will be that the disaster will be brought forward by another few hundred years. If you don't choose the answer I want, then I will still seal you. I will only wait for 100 years. The young man smiled faintly and cast Su Ming a profound glance. When he turned around, he walked into the air. His body drifted elegantly, and when he took his first step, his flesh and blood instantly disappeared, turning into bones. When he took his second step, the other half of his body also turned into a skeleton, but it still retained a certain amount of life force. When he took his third step, the will that had gathered on the body finally left. The skeleton turned into dust and disappeared with the wind. Su Ming watched Arid Triad leave. He stared at the body of a cultivator he had clearly chosen casually on the cultivation planet. Since Arid Triad had sent his will to descend on the planet, he had stimulated all the potential of life in the body so that it could bear a hint of Arid Triad's will. When Arid Triad left, the body instantly withered and turned into ashes. When Su Ming saw this, he fell silent. When Arid Triad left, the entire planet returned to normal. Su Ming's expression was calm, but a barely noticeable, sharp glare shone in his eyes. When he lowered his head, he cast a deep glance at the ancient tree in front of him. After a long while, he cast another glance at the ancient tree. This time, Su Ming stared at it for a long time until he closed his eyes. A hint of resolution appeared in his covered pupils. His conversation with Arid Triad up to the point where Arid Triad said his choice might have seemed normal, but only those who had reached Su Ming's realm could sense the murderous intent contained within. Each of Arid Triad's words contained a sharp intent. If Su Ming had been careless, then he would not have been able to choose, but would have brought forward the battle of wills between him and Arid Triad. Su Ming's reply, the analogy between night and day, and the search for the direction where the setting sun would fall contained his will. His conversation with Arid Triad did not show any signs of his will being affected, which was why Arid Triad did not attack. After all, Su Ming already possessed the right to possess Arid Triad, which was why it would not be easy for Arid Triad to destroy him. He needed a turning point and an opening. Only then would he not affect his plan to possess Harmonious Morris Alba when the disaster descended 500 years later. If his plan was affected because of Su Ming to Arid Triad, the gains would not make up for the losses. That was why he had said that he wanted to make a choice, but in truth, that choice was not even a choice. It was a blatant threat, but if Su Ming truly treated it as a threat, then he was bound to be sealed. Even if he chose to work together with Arid Triad would definitely not agree to it and would instead seal him, because this choice was a seed. It was a seed that Arid Triad had planted in Su Ming's heart. It was just like how Su Ming's words were planted in Arid Triad's heart to serve him. His choice was a seed planted in Su Ming's heart by Arid Triad. It was just like how Su Ming's words during the day and night were also a seed planted in Arid Triad to serve him. Su Ming opened his eyes, turned around, and walked towards Yuxian. At that moment, he walked towards Elder Mo Sang, who had a worried look on his face. Who is he? The elder hesitated for a moment, then a hint of understanding appeared on his face. The answer contained within that understanding and hesitation had already appeared in the elder's heart. Arid Triad. Su Ming smiled faintly and did not say anything else. He stared at his elder, who had clearly become much older. Su Ming knew that his elder had many secrets, and they were related to his past self as well as great Berserker tribe. "Let's go home," Su Ming said softly. With Yu Xian and his elder, the three of them turned into long arcs and left the cultivation planet. They entered the galaxy and disappeared from the Emperor of Abyss True World. The excited bald crane and the satisfied abyss dragon also disappeared. One of them had taken away all the crystals in the expanse cosmos, and the other had fulfilled the wish it had had when it was young. The abyss dragon did not mention this wish at all, but based on the expression on its face as it often reminisced about it, there seemed to be a hint of lust in it. Time passed, and in the blink of an eye, 3 years passed. Su Ming, who had returned to Ninth Summit, did not venture out during those 3 years. He stayed with his senior brothers, and by his side were Yu Xian, Song Lan, and Su Hui. The elder returned to the Berserkers tribe and built a house at the foot of Dark Mountain in the land of Berserkers. Like a real old man in the mortal world, he watched the sun rise and set in a very calm manner. He had many stories, and perhaps they spanned through the 4 eras of this aeon, but Su Ming did not ask about them. Instead, he often came to the place and sat beside the elder. They watched the sky together, and every single time he did so, Su Ming would remember Dark Mountain in his memories, Xiaohong, and the people who had now become strangers to him. He might not have asked about the elder's secret, but with Su Ming's level of cultivation, he could already tell some of the truth. There were signs of multiple cycles of life and death on the elder's body. During those cycles of life and death, the elder of Great Berserker tribe had used this method to preserve the elder's soul. And during those cycles of life and death, perhaps he had been searching for the scene that no one else could see when he predicted the Berserker's day. It was a butterfly that could give Great Berserker tribe a future. The elder lifted his head and stared at Su Ming, who had spent another day with him and was now leaving into the distance. Under the moonlight, he mumbled under his breath, "This butterfly is not Harmonious Morris Alba. This butterfly is your my La Su." As he mumbled, a light of expectation appeared in the elder's eyes. He would never forget the scene he saw when he predicted the Berserker's day. He had gone through countless cycles of life and death just to wait for Su Ming, to protect this child, to let him come into contact with the Berserkers, to make him acknowledge them. During those 3 years, with his great talent and bold vision, second senior brother finally expanded Ninth Summit's influence to all of true Morning Dao world after Su Ming intimidated Dark Dawn and Saint Fire, causing Ninth Summit to live up to its name and become the only sect in true Morning Dao world. Eldest senior brother's level cultivation also increased with each passing day. As for Hu Zi, his personality made it impossible for him to stay in one place for long, which was why he often went out and swept through the world to show off his might to the other true worlds. Due to Su Ming's existence and the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei's fear towards him, wherever Ninth Summit went, the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire would be forced to retreat. This was also the reason why Hu Zi's existence would usually cause a battle that was clearly disadvantageous to the other true worlds to be unable to continue. Most of the time, when Hu Zi saw both sides fighting against each other, he would immediately roar. Ninth Summit has beautiful mountains and clear waters. When the disciples from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire see it, they will have to make a detour. The strongest, youngest junior brother in all of Arid Triad is in Ninth Summit. If you want to join Ninth Summit, immediately shout, "I'd like to see which brat from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire will dare to attack." That was the truth. As long as Hu Zi was in the battlefield and someone shouted that they wanted to join Ninth Summit, even if the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire closed in on them with their killing moves, they would immediately ignore the backlash and not dare to attack. They could only endure this aggrieved feeling because the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei had already clearly told all the cultivators that Ninth Summit was not to be provoked. If it was just the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei acting this way, it would have been fine, but this death order came from the 3 sovereigns of Dawn from Dark Dawn and the 3 saint from Saint Fire. In fact, every single time a new cultivator from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire descended in true Morning Dao world, they would be the first about to Ninth Summit before they could leave. During the 3 years, Su Ming's name had shaken all of Arid Triad, and because of it, Ninth Summit's influence became stronger. In just 3 years, the number of cultivators who were once cultivators from other true worlds had increased by leaps and bounds. No matter what their goal was, they chose to become disciples of Ninth Summit. A branch sect of Ninth Summit was set up in the Emperor of Abyss True World, and a branch sect of Ninth Summit also appeared in True Sacredine World. Elda's senior brother and Hu-Zi were stationed in these two branches to intimidate the world. As time passed, another 3 years went by. Some major events happened, such as Su Xian, Yi, and Lei Chun disappearing from the Emperor of Abyss True World. The Emperor of Abyss True World submitted to Dark Dawn, and the sublime paragon of that true world, the cultivator who had avoided the disaster of death before Su Ming, chose to become a disciple of Ninth Summit. True Sacred Een World lasted for 5 years before its world protection rune crumbled. On the 6th year, it was occupied by Dark Dawn and Saint Defire. The living beings in it were plunged into misery and suffering, and a devastating number of people died. Su Ming did not bother about it. He was not a saint. He was only gentle to those he cared about. As for the others, to him, who was the strongest will in this true world besides Triad, they were all part of the rise and fall of life. It did not matter whether it was Dark Dawn or Saint Defire. Su Ming had long since seen through the true reason behind them starting the war. It was an offering when the third 3 years arrived and ended. A change occurred in the war that Su Ming did not pay attention to. This change had already been within Su Ming's expectations, because an offering required both sides, not just one, or else it would be a massacre, not an offering. This change came from the fourth true world. The antecedental spirits who had been suppressed in the fourth true world during the 4 eons of that aeon seemed to have their seals released overnight. Once they came out, a fierce war erupted against Dark Dawn and Saint Defire. The war even affected Ninth Summit. The madness and arrogance of the released antecedental spirits caused the 4 true worlds in Arid Triad to descend into chaos. At that moment, Su Ming lifted his right hand and put down the chess piece he was using to play against his elder. He lifted his head and looked in the direction of the 4th true world. I'll have to teach these antecedental spirits a lesson. This true world can be in chaos, but even if it is chaos, it must be chaos in an orderly fashion. Not like this, Su Ming said faintly. His elder smiled amiably. He did not speak, but lowered his head to look at the chessboard. Let me tell you a piece of good news. I just extorted a bottle of 30-year-old wine from wind chimes. When we gather as book friends, I'll bring it out and treat all of you to a drink. Huh. Chapter 1420. The elder stared at the chessboard. There was a smile on Yuxian's face as she sat beside Su Ming. Her expression was incredibly focused as she stared at the chessboard. When Su Ming spoke, a cunning look appeared in her eyes. She lifted her hand to tuck a lock of hair that danced in the wind behind her ear, and suddenly, Song Lan let out a soft cough. Elder. The elder lifted his head. At the instant his gaze landed on Song Lan, Yuxian put down her hand and gently moved the elder's white piece on the chessboard. Elder, there are quite a number of berserkers who want to come and greet you. Do you think we should have them come over the next few days? Song Lan's expression remained the same. Not a single hint of change could be detected on her face. She spoke gently to the elder with an incredibly respectful expression. Go and make arrangements for this. The elder smiled amiably. As he spoke, he instinctively lowered his head to look at the chessboard. A smile appeared on Su Hui's face as she stood beside Su Ming. She swept her gaze past Song Lan and Yuxian before she immediately spoke. Elder, this game of chess will take some time before we can continue. Why don't you tell us about Su Ming's childhood? That's right, Elder. Tell us about his childhood. Big-sistered Song Lan, don't you think so? Yuxian quickly said. Compared to the gentle and elegant Song Lan, there was no difference in age between them. Both Yuxian and Su Hui addressed Song Lan as their big sister. Su Hui was second. Yuxian gave off a petite feeling regardless of whether it was her personality or the way she usually spoke, which was why she was the youngest among the 3 women. The elder laughed and no longer looked at the chessboard. Instead, he lifted his head to look at the 3 women beside Su Ming, and his smile became even more amiable. The 3 women each had their own merits, and all of them were prodigies. The elder stared at them, then at Su Ming, who had his eyes closed at that moment. He happily told them about some of the interesting things that happened when Su Ming was young. However, he did not know that the chessboard had changed, causing Su Ming's original disadvantage to turn into an advantage. Su Ming did not pay any attention to any of this. At the instant he closed his eyes, he spread his divine sense outwards and turned it into his will. During that instant, he descended into the fourth true world. The fourth true world was in chaos. Wisps of wills belonging to antecedental spirits filled the entire area with a desire to wreak havoc, madness, and an arrogance that made it seem as if they wanted to tear apart the world. When they rose to power, they surrounded the fourth true world and launched a bloody battle. Besides the fourth true world, the battle had also spread to true sacredine world and the emperor of abyss true world. In fact, there were some antecedental spirits from the fourth true world in true morning Tao world. They roared and laughed madly as they engaged in a battle to the death against those from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire. Every single time a cultivator from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire died, the antecedental spirits would immediately suck in a suction force and absorb the cultivator's body into their bodies, as if they were devouring him. In fact, the antecedental spirits who had their seals broken and were released from the fourth true world did not care whether their enemies were from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire. Even the cultivators from the other true worlds were their attackers and food. Every single time they devoured a cultivator, they would become slightly stronger. Because of that, the antecedental spirits who rushed out from the fourth true world stirred up another disaster in Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos. As the cultivators from Arid Triad, Dark Dawn, and Saint D Fire continued dying, and the antecedental spirits rushed out and slaughtered their way out during the past year, Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos became slightly different from before. Su Ming could sense that as these people died, his will had risen by quite a large margin. Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos was filled with an invisible power that could make a person descend into madness. It was as if a bloody flower in the apocalypse was continuously spreading and blooming, and Su Ming could clearly sense that the speed at which Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos moved during the past 10 years was comparable to the speed at which it had moved 70 to 80 years before the slaughter. Everything seemed to have become 7 times faster. Only by doing so could the disaster formed by the overlapping of the 4 wings, which should have taken 3,000-something years to form, be reduced to 500 years. As Su Ming watched the changes in Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos, he placed all of it in his heart, as if he had come to understand everything. His heart was calm, and not a single ripple could be detected in it. He knew that 100 years later, he would face a disaster, and it would come from Arid Triad. If Su Ming could not get through this disaster, then there would be no need for him to talk about the future. If he could, then 500 years later, Arid Triad's disaster would arrive. At the instant the wings overlapped, Su Ming would possess Arid Triad. He would not choose to work together with Arid Triad. Forget the fact that the choice Arid Triad gave Su Ming was not even a choice, but a seed buried in his heart. 100 years later, when the seed grew, it would bring about the disaster that would destroy the seal. Even if Arid Triad truly wanted to work together with Su Ming would not choose to do so, because it was just as he said, his path was different from Arid Triad's. When people reached Su Ming and Arid Triad's level of cultivation, they could no longer differentiate between good and evil, and neither could they hate each other. There was only a battle of wills, where those whose paths were different could not work together. Originally, Su Ming had not been certain about this, but before he left, he cast 3 deep glances at the ancient tree in the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World. Those 3 glances allowed him to understand karma. 100 years later, under the ancient tree, Su Ming would not run away from his promise with Arid Triad. He would go. It was just like how the green beside the ancient tree seemed to connect to the sky. The green was the sea, and the green was the tree. If Su Ming wanted to connect the sky to the sea, then the sea and the tree would become one. Perhaps they were originally one. Su Ming sighed in his heart. He gathered his will together and no longer thought about these things. Instead, as his will spread out, it instantly filled all of Arid Triad. Even if true Sacredine worlds will did not belong to Su Ming, and the fourth true worlds will rejected him, with the great strength of Su Ming's will from the four great true worlds, he instantly suppressed the two great wills, causing them to not dare reveal their presences. Instead, they temporarily allowed Su Ming's will to sweep through their true worlds. To the east of the fourth true world was a huge swamp in the galaxy. It gave off a bloody stench, and there were countless corpses soaking in it. There were cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire, as well as cultivators from Arid Triad. In fact, there were dozens of people who belonged to Ninth Summit's branch sect. They had already lost their lives. As their bodies soaked in the swamp, they were slowly rotting and being absorbed. Nearly 30,000 cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire surrounded the swamp. All of them had wary expressions on their faces. Under the lead of 3 antecedent spirits belonging to them, they were fighting against the swamp with their divine abilities. As booming sounds echoed in the air, a face appeared in the swamp. There was a ferocious look on it as it stared at the cultivators around it. "All of you must die." As a muffled roar echoed in the air, the swamp swiftly grew larger, but at that moment, an aura caused the minds of the 30,000 cultivators to instantly go blank. Even the 3 antecedent spirits from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire looked as if their souls had been frozen, and they lost all consciousness. The huge swamp shuddered, and the face on it swiftly lifted its head to stare at space. Its pupils shrank, and shock appeared in them. "Who is it? Who are you?" When his roars echoed in the air, a cold harumph traveled forth. Soon after, a hand appeared in space. It was not big, and when it pushed down gently, the swamp immediately roared. Its body started drying up right before everyone's eyes, and a large number of cracks instantly appeared on its body. When banging sounds echoed in the air, nearly 4/10 of its body crumbled. "I, Su Ming, do not care about killing the cultivators from Dark Dawn, Saint D Fire, and Arid Triad, but if you provoke Ninth Summit, you will not do again." When Su Ming's voice reached the antecedent spirit's ears, it turned into a deep, intimidating force that caused the swamp to tremble. During that instant, it did not dare to struggle or fight back. Ninth Summit's name was branded deeply into the antecedent spirit's divine sense at that moment, and it became a taboo. Su Ming's terror shocked the antecedent spirit deeply. No matter how mad he was, in the face of this absolute power that could destroy him with a flip of his hand, he could only lower his head and show respect. In the west of the fourth true world was a person who looked like a normal person, but had 2 feet that were 100 feet tall. He was walking through the galaxy. His body looked incredibly uncoordinated and incredibly strange, but there was a terrifying presence spreading out from his body. His hair was a mess, and his upper body was bare. As he moved forward, there was a hint of lust in his smile as he chased after 8 cultivators in front of him. There were 3 cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire, 4 from the Emperor of Abyss True World, and 1 female cultivator who had joined True Sacredine World's Ninth Summit's branch sect 3 years ago. As the big-footed monster laughed, he lifted his right hand. It instantly stretched out, and as if a vacuum had been formed, it swiftly sucked in the 3 cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire. When they landed on his palm, he tightened his grip, and the 3 of them were reduced to minced meat with a bang. When a monster's hand appeared again, the minced meat seemed to have turned into the fiercest enchanted vessel that charged towards the remaining 5 cultivators. The 4 cultivators from the Emperor of Abyss True World screamed in pain. The minced meat pierced through their bodies and turned them into a part of the minced meat. As for the female cultivator from Ninth Summit, her face turned pale. The monster's right hand, which was several times larger than its original size, grabbed her. When he placed her in front of him, the lust in his eyes grew stronger. "Not bad, not bad. You could be a furnace." The monster laughed loudly and tossed the woman into his sleeve. There were thousands of female cultivators in the seemingly small sleeve, and all of them had been captured by him. When he turned around and was about to leave, the monster's body suddenly jolted. A solemn expression instantly appeared on his face, and his pupils shrank. He stared at a white-robed figure who had appeared behind him at some unknown point of time. An antecedental spirit, like you shouldn't be sealed. You should be wiped off. Su Ming frowned. When he spoke flatly, he took a step forward. The strange man roared. He could sense a great sense of life-threatening danger from Su Ming, and just as he was about to retreat, Su Ming had already walked past him. As Su Ming left into the distance, the giant shuddered. His head was swiftly separated from his body, and his body instantly withered away. His sleeve was torn to shreds, and when the thousands of female cultivators in it escaped, the monster's body crumbled with a bang. He turned into thousands of wisps of aura that fused into the thousands of women's bodies, becoming the greatest serendipity that allowed their levels of cultivation to increase exponentially. Chapter 14:21. This was Su Ming's punishment for the strange person. Similar scenes appeared in hundreds of places in the fourth true world at the same time. Based on how Su Ming did things, some of them were wiped off, and some of them were given a warning. There were no exceptions. The antecedental spirits, released from the fourth true world, had a mental connection with each other. During that instant, when Su Ming wiped off some of their antecedental spirits and killed them, all the antecedental spirits sensed it clearly. If there were only a few of them who died, there would not have been too much shock, but in a short span of a dozen breaths, a total of 32 antecedental spirits had been wiped off. The shock brought about by this matter intimidated all the other antecedental spirits, especially since the moment they felt intimidated, the living antecedental spirits immediately sensed Su Ming's terrifying will descend around them. Without exception, all of them received different degrees of punishment, and all of them were as terrified as cicadas in winter. They etched Ninth Summit's name firmly in their hearts. When Su Ming's will descended on true, sacredine world, the dozens of antecedental spirits who had their seals removed felt their hearts tremble. No matter what they were doing, they were instantly enveloped by a layer of freezing cold. Almost at the same time, a voice reached their ears. Such a ruthless and ruthless person should be wiped off. As the voice echoed in the hearts of all the antecedental spirits in true, sacredine world, they immediately sensed the presence of one of their companions disappearing. It meant that the person had died. Since this is your first offense, there will be no next time. Killing for pleasure, you will be warned once. Extreme brutality, you will be wiped off. In the span of a few breaths, Su Ming's voice echoed in the air, and 3 antecedental spirits were wiped off. The intimidating might formed by this shock instantly caused all the antecedental spirits in true, sacredine world to tremble, and terror appeared on their faces. If you dare provoke Ninth Summit, I will wipe off all of you. When Su Ming's final words echoed in the antecedental spirits' ears, all the antecedental spirits in true sacredine world sensed Su Ming's terrifying and domineering presence in the midst of their silence. It was the same for the Emperor of Abyss True World. When Su Ming's will descended and left, 4 of the antecedental spirits who had surged into the true world disappeared forever. The last was True Morning Dao World. There were 13 antecedental spirits who had stepped into the true world to cause chaos. Su Ming's method to deal with them was completely different from that of the other true worlds. He did not speak. When his will swept through the area, booming sounds reverberated in space, and the 13 antecedental spirits who had been terrified by their companions dying one after another had their bodies and souls destroyed. A dragon had a reverse scale, and True Morning Dao World could be said to be the place where Su Ming's reverse scale existed. He would not allow any accidents to happen in this place, which was why all those who dare trespass would definitely die. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, it only lasted for the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn. When Su Ming opened his eyes beside the chessboard, his expression was indifferent. He watched his elder talk about the interesting things that happened when he was young, and Yu Xian, Song Lan, and Su Hui listened to him with great interest. A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. When he lowered his head to look at the chessboard, he picked up a black piece with his right hand, and he was suddenly stunned. He remembered that one of the white pieces was not in its current position. When a slightly strange expression appeared on his face, the bald crane lifted its head from the ground and stared at Su Ming in a lackadaisical manner, then at Yu Xian. A thought appeared in its head, but just as it was about to show off its abilities in an ingratiating manner, the cold Yu Xian turned her head to the side and cast the bald crane a glance with a smile. That glance immediately caused the bald crane to shudder. It could clearly see the threat in Yu Xian's gaze. It quickly put on a stern expression and ran to the Abyss Dragon. As for the Abyss Dragon, it was by the lake not too far away. It was staring at the lake with a dumbfounded expression, occasionally growling at the surface. When the bald crane arrived, it struck its head viciously. "What are you looking at? Darn all. You hit me again. I think I see another me in the lake." The Abyss Dragon scratched its head and spoke in a very aggrieved manner. It had always felt that it had become much dumber than before. If it was anyone else who had their head continuously struck for 1,000 years, they would also do something that others would not be able to understand during the repeated tremors. "Whoa, you stupid dragon, the one in the lake is you." "Huh." The bald crane shook its head and looked at the Abyss Dragon with a pitiful look. It thought that if it found anyone to be an eyesore in the future, it would strike their head again and again. When it thought of this, the bald crane's eyes immediately lit up, and it became slightly smug, as if it had just thought of a divine ability with an endless might. At that moment, it did not notice that the Abyss Dragon's reflection on the lake had the same smug look on its silly face. Does this stupid crane really think that I don't know? I, the Abyss Dragon, am much smarter than it. It thinks that I'm stupid and that I'm just playing with it." Time passed in this warmth that Su Ming had not felt for a long time. 1 year later, Su Ming had stayed in Ninth Summit for a total of 10 years. Su Ming did not continue living in the peace of Ninth Summit. Instead, he chose to leave. He wanted to complete his third task, which was to head to Dark Dawn to visit his mother's tribe. He also wanted to search for traces of his master, Tian Xiezi. Perhaps there was also the god of berserkers, Lai Shan Xiao. On that day, the elder stood outside the house and looked at the sky. He could vaguely see Su Ming turning his head back to look at Ninth Summit from the galaxy. "You still have a long way to go. I'm already very satisfied that I've been able to see you grow up to this point," the elder mumbled. The smile on his face became even more kind, but there seemed to be a faint hint of aura of death within that kindness. It was time for him to return to the world. He had gone through countless cycles of life and death, and this time he had finally fulfilled his wish. While in a galaxy, Su Ming turned his head back to look at Ninth Summit. He saw his eldest senior brother and the others, Yu Xian, the 3 women, and the aura of death on his elder's body. That aura was not thick, but as time passed, it would gradually become thicker. Birth, old age, sickness, and death were things that could not be changed, but the disaster that would happen 500 years later might be able to change all of this. In silence, Su Ming turned around and walked into space. The bald crane followed behind him. Occasionally, it would turn its head back to look at the Abyss Dragon. There was a slight reluctance on its face. It was reluctant because it could not pat the Abyss Dragon's head every single day in the future. In its regret, it made up its mind that once it went to Dark Dawn, it had to find a replacement. It could not let this powerful divine ability of its become rusty. The galaxy was boundless. Dazzling starlight would occasionally decorate it, as if it was a picture. No one knew who had drawn the galaxy while drinking wine in the past. Su Ming walked through the galaxy and went to Arid Triad's Gap in true Morning Dao world. It was the place where Dark Dawn and Saint Defire would descend, and it was also the entrance to Dark Dawn and Saint Defire. The bald crane chattered nonstop all along the way. It continued talking about how it would obtain crystals once it arrived in Dark Dawn's camp. As it spoke, Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt, and he turned his head around to look at the bald crane. "Darn it all, when I get there, I'll definitely loot all the crystals. I'll definitely." When the bald crane saw Su Ming turn his head around, it was momentarily stunned. Then, it turned around to look at Su Ming. "What's wrong?" Su Ming stared at the bald crane, and a smile appeared on his face. "Don't be afraid. I'll bring you back. Over there, no one can stop you from finding yourself," Su Ming said softly. When he said those words, the bald crane shuddered and lowered its head in silence. Su Ming could already tell that it was afraid of Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire. It was not afraid of going to Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire because there was something terrifying there, but because that place might be its homeland. After a long while, when the bald crane lifted its head, it still had that heartless expression on its face. It continued mumbling about how it wanted to loot crystals while standing beside Su Ming. A long, long time later, when the bald crane stared at the galaxy, it tried its best to recall its memories, but it could not find its existence. However, occasionally, the white-robed figure in the galaxy would appear in its dazed memories and tell it not to be afraid. Every single time, it would feel sad, but could not find the source of its sadness. It was a melancholy that it could not find no trace of. It could only stand at the top of the mountain and stare at the galaxy. Even if it had its own sect, was no longer obsessed with crystals, and was worshipped by countless cultivators, it still wanted to search for the past it had lost and could not find. It only remembered vaguely that there was once a person who had brought it through a part of its life. As the bald crane continued mumbling, Su Ming brought it into the distance and walked towards Arid Triad's Gap. The sovereign of Dongyan, Pei, had arrived a long time ago. He obeyed Su Ming's words that had echoed in his ears 10 years ago. In fact, he had been waiting for Su Ming a few months ahead of time. When Su Ming walked towards Arid Triad's Gap, in the vast space beyond Arid Triad, or rather, beyond the four wings of harmonious Morris Alba, where the butterfly had its eyes closed and was deep in slumber, there was no galaxy in that space. There was only a vast expanse of fog, which was like the fog of chaos that had existed since the beginning of time. At that moment, a ray of white light suddenly shone in all directions, causing the fog in the area to tumble and avoid it, revealing what was inside. It was a huge ring-shaped feng shui compass. There were countless runic symbols carved on it, and it was the light spreading out from them that formed the white light that illuminated the vast expanse of space. There was a young man dressed in a black robe sitting on the feng shui compass at that moment. He had long black hair, and he gave off a ghastly and aloof air. He held a string of pearls in his hand. There were 9 of them in total. 6 of them shone brightly, and 3 were dull. However, at that instant, one of the 3 dull pearls shone with a faint light. The shadow of a crane could be vaguely seen in that light. When the black-robed young man spun the string of pearls in his hand, he slowly lifted his head and stared at the vast expanse in the distance. Over there was the region where harmonious Morris Alba, which had stopped to rest among the 9 butterflies in the past, was located. I finally found the 7th reversed spirit. Everyone, don't forget about your recommendation votes. Chapter 1422. Greetings, Senior Su. It's been 10 years since we last met, and your demeanor has become even greater than before. Your level of cultivation is much stronger than before, and it has truly made me admire you from the depths of my heart. In fact, I often dream of you, and I worship you day and night, hoping that the 10 years will pass in the blink of an eye. Then, I will be able to see you again and witness your demeanor with my own eyes. My respect for you cannot be described with the words of any aeon. It comes from the bottom of my heart and my soul. It is the strongest excitement I have ever felt in my life. Senior, you are as tall as a pine tree. Senior, your spirit is so dazzling that it surpasses the galaxy. Senior, you are. Yin Pei had been waiting for Su Ming at Arid Triad's Gap for quite some time. At the instant he saw Su Ming, crazed delight appeared on his face. He lifted his foot and immediately took a few brisk steps forward. When he wrapped his fist in his palm towards Su Ming, he bowed deeply to him. With it, his hands almost touched the tips of his toes. It was truly difficult for the Sovereign of Dawn. Not only had he bowed to Su Ming so thoroughly, he had also said his words in an incredibly clear manner. Each of his words contained a great amount of emotion, and each of them contained the true fanaticism of the sovereign of Don Yen Pei. Forget about whether Su Ming was telling the truth or not. Just his voice and words alone revealed Yen Pei's desire to flatter and flatter Su Ming. Su Ming cast Yen Pei a glance, then let out a fake cough and cut off the man's words. Yen Pei's change was within reason. In truth, while Su Ming was not used to this sort of attitude, he still admired it. But before he could say anything, the bald crane's eyes suddenly focused, and a hint of wariness appeared in its eyes. It suddenly had a feeling that the sovereign of Don Yen Pei was simply too shameless. His level of shamelessness caused the bald crane to be wary of him, but at the same time, it also sighed in amazement. This guy, damn it, could it be that he wants to snatch my job? Or else why would his expression look so familiar? Darn it all, that's an expression that only I can show in front of Su Ming. This shameless Yen Pei. I have to memorize all the words he said just now. This guy's flattery methods do indeed have things that I, the great-grandpa crane, can learn from. The bald crane's spirits immediately lifted, and it made a decision in its heart. The bald crane was very good at this. It was very eager to learn, such as when it saw the abyss dragon turn into a dog in the past. In its days, it had thought that dogs were rather fierce, which was why it learned to turn into one. When it was in the land of berserkers, it was chased by the birds flying on the surface of the sea. It believed that the birds were very fierce, which was why it immediately learned to become of them. When it saw that some of the clans in Black Ink Planet were rather popular when they were looking for a bride, it had worked together with the abyss dragon to turn into a beautiful woman and trick the families into marrying them. This showed that the bald crane was diligent and eager to learn. Just like at that moment, its eagerness to learn had appeared once again. When the bald crane became wary, the sovereign of Don Yen Pei put on an obsequious smile, but the instant he saw the bald crane, his heart let out a loud thump. His instincts told him that the bald crane was definitely a great enemy of his. This great enemy was not a fight to the death, but one that he had decided in his heart to become Su Ming's #1 confidant and his greatest competitor. Damn it! Why is there a crane by Senior Su's side? Look at that crane's protruding mouth and monkey cheeks. It's also bald. It's clearly the outward appearance of someone who has practiced shamelessness and filth to a certain degree. This crane is my great enemy. The sovereign of Don Yen Pei immediately remembered the bald crane in his heart, but he did not show a single hint of it on his face. He still put on an obsequious expression. At that moment, if any cultivator from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire saw his expression, they would definitely be dumbfounded. It would be difficult for them to imagine that Yen Pei, who had always been known for his callousness and arrogance in Dark Dawn, would have such an expression on his face. Senior, you're finally here. I've been waiting for this day for a long, long time. Senior, ever since I saw you, I immediately felt that being a sovereign of Dawn is no longer fun. I came to a sudden realization, and I will give up on my status as a sovereign of Dawn. I only wish to follow you and be your servant. Wherever you point to, I, little Yin Zi, will immediately rush out. Even if I have to go through mountains of blades and seas of fire, I will not even frown. Senior, please allow me to follow you on account of how devoted I am. Please allow me. The sovereign of Dawn, Yen Pei, gritted his teeth. Due to the bald crane's appearance, he felt a great sense of danger, which was why he changed his original plan. As he spoke, he knelt down with a thud and completely gave up on his status as a sovereign of Dawn. The more callous a person appeared to be, the better the effect would be when they did this. The nobler the person's status was, the more sincere they would be when they did this. This was something Yen Pei himself knew. In truth, the reason why he could become a sovereign of Dawn was largely related to his personality in the early days. He usually appeared aloof and arrogant, but when he truly ran into life-threatening danger, his expression would immediately change. He could be said to be someone who knew when to submit and when to stand up. He did not feel that his status was beneath him. To Yen Pei, dignity was something that could be used to exchange for other things. However, once he became strong and became a sovereign of Dawn, he felt that there was no one else who could make him act like this, unless it was the old monsters who were in deep sleep. However, those old monsters had not woken up, which was why Yin Pei had sealed away the divine ability he believed to be his strongest. But now, after he personally witnessed and experienced Su Ming's terror several times, he naturally brought out the divine ability he had been practicing for years and returned to his original nature. Yin Pei's words stunned Su Ming. He was truly stunned. Su Ming had never heard this sort of endless flattery, even from the bald crane. In fact, it could be said that this was practically the first time he had ever heard such words in his life. Even if he had heard it before, Su Ming had ignored most of it. However, the person before him was one of the three sovereigns of Dawn in Dark Dawn, which was why Su Ming was truly stunned. Even with his mind, a rare blank appeared at that instant. When Yin Pei saw Su Ming's expression, he was also stunned. In truth, he had only said about 1/10 of the compliments he had prepared in his heart. He had originally thought that the bald crane was a great enemy, and that Su Ming might have long since become accustomed to it. He had been thinking about how he should change his words to make the effect even stronger. However, when he saw Su Ming being stunned, Yin Pei was immediately filled with crazed delight. He also let out a sigh of relief and thought that the bald crane could not compare to him. Just as he was about to continue speaking and strike while the iron was hot, the bald crane instantly panicked. Nonsense! The bald crane might not have any feathers, but it did have some hairs. All of them stood up at that moment, and with great hostility, it glared at Yin Pei while speaking in a shrill voice. Su Ming, don't believe in this damn *TCH's words. He said that he can go through mountains of blades and seas of fire without even frowning, but with his level of cultivation, mountains of blades and seas of fire are nothing. I said that going through mountains of blades and seas of fire was just a metaphor. Brother Bald Crane, don't hold on to this and refuse to let it go. Do you know what metaphor is? Oh well, you shouldn't have come to understand this realm yet. Oh well, if I have the chance in the future, I will teach you properly, Yin Pei immediately said without a hint of hesitation. Why you? I went through the dangers in the land of berserkers with Su Ming. If I, Yin Pei, am safe in the future and Senior Su is injured, then I will be condemned by all. I was exiled to Divine Essence Star Ocean with Su Ming. The bald crane was completely enraged. It flapped its wings, and a vast presence immediately erupted from its body. I will fight against the world with Senior Su in the future. Even if it's Dark Dawn, I will not show any mercy when I attack. Yin Pei glared at the bald crane, and the man and crane immediately began attacking each other to show their loyalty. When Su Ming saw them talking to each other, he did not know whether he should laugh or cry. Once he cast Yin Pei a glance, he let out a fake cough and swung his arm. Immediately, the two of them separated from each other, as if they were about to erupt their cultivation bases and fight to the death. Young Yin Zi is here. Excitement immediately appeared on Yin Pei's face, and he knelt down to worship Su Ming once again. Haha, Yin Zi, you're just a Yin Zi. The bald crane seemed to have remembered something, and a perverted look suddenly appeared on its face. Then, it glared at Yin Pei fiercely and started cursing him viciously in its heart. Swallow, don't blame Grandpa Crane for being ruthless. You're too cunning, and you're the one who forced me to do this. Grandpa Crane is prepared to use stupid claw on you and make you end up like the Abyss Dragon. The bald crane's fierce look immediately caused Yin Pei to be on guard. He wondered in his heart, could it be that this bald crane has some powerful move? All right, we'll stop here. Yin, hurry up and lead the way to Dark Dawn's camp. Su Ming was still not quite used to this. After letting out a fake cough, he spoke to Yin Pei. Young Yin Zi understood. Yin Pei's spirits lifted. He immediately got up, lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pointed at Arid Triad's gap not too far away. The gap immediately shuddered with a bang, and a huge runic symbol appeared. It shone a few times before it froze up and stopped moving. Su Ming's expression calmed down. He stared at Arid Triad's gap. He had personally witnessed the formation of the gap in the past, and at that time, he had not expected that he would be able to step into Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire through it. Master, nostalgia appeared in Su Ming's eyes, but he took a step forward without any hesitation. In an instant, he stepped into Arid Triad's gap. Behind him, the bald crane and Yin Pei flew out at the same time, as if they were fighting over who would be the first to follow Su Ming. They turned into two long arcs, and with Su Ming, disappeared into Arid Triad's gap. I'll be setting up a WeChat official account today. Once I'm done, I'll tell everyone. At that time, they'll put in more effort, or else if I don't have a certain number of fans, I won't be able to meet the requirements to be verified. Chapter 1423. In Dark Dawn's camp, Arid Triad occupied the second wing of Harmonious Morris Alba's four wings. It was a huge expanse cosmos. It might not be as big as Arid Triad's first expanse cosmos, but its overall size was equivalent to the size of 3 true worlds in Arid Triad. After all, besides the 4 great true worlds, Arid Triad also had Divine Essence Star Ocean and some other empty spots at its edge. In fact, during the previous era of the current Aeon, Arid Triad had 9 true worlds. In Arid Triad's second expanse cosmos was the smaller wing under Harmonious Morris Alba's 2 wings. The expanse cosmos on Arid Triad's side was occupied by Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire, and each of them had half of it. It might seem big, but it was also relatively small. However, Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire were known as camps because each of them had 180 expanse cosmoses. There were 360 expanse cosmoses gathered in Arid Triad's second expanse cosmos. They were densely packed together and separated. They had formed such a unique camp of expanse cosmoses because both Saint D Fire and Dark Dawn had migrated over during the second era of the current Aeon. At the same time, they continued with the cultivation system and cultivation methods of the second era. They also continued with the structure of the ancient kingdoms formed by different tribes. Each of the 360 expanse cosmoses belonging to Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire had a tribe from the past that continued to grow and occupy an expanse cosmos. In fact, the 2 camps had even set up expanse cosmos conventions. The expanse cosmos conventions were formed by the hereditary inheritances of the tribe elders from the 180 expanse cosmoses. They were led by the 3 sovereigns of Dawn, and they formed the highest authority in the camp. There were 3 sovereign expanse cosmoses and 1 central expanse cosmos in Dark Dawn's camp. The 3 sovereign expanse cosmoses formed a triangular shape that surrounded the central expanse cosmos. The central expanse cosmos was the core of Dark Dawn's camp. Every single expanse cosmos conventions from the 180 expanse cosmoses would be held there to decide all the major matters related to Dark Dawn's camp. As for the 3 sovereigns, they were not permanent. Instead, they were chosen from the various tribes. Every 30,000 years was a cycle. Once that cycle was over, they would be elected again, and whether they could become sovereigns of Dawn would depend on their strength, luck, and the support of their respective tribes. Of course, their level of cultivation was also an important factor. As sovereigns of Dawn, they had to be in Avacania realm to have the right to compete for the position of sovereigns of Dawn, which was why over the countless years, sovereigns of Dawn did not change often, unless a new Avacania sovereigns of Avacania realm appeared. It was the same for the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei in the past. As he fought and paid an unknown price, he finally replaced the previous sovereign of Dawn and reached the peak. And now, as time passed, the cycle of 30,000 years had come to an end. It would have been fine if no other Avacania realm cultivators had appeared, but there were 2 Avacania realm cultivators in Dark Dawn's camp. One was Ancestor Hong, who had been replaced by Yin Pei, and the other was the proud son of heaven of the Central China tribe, Huang Tai. The 2 of them clearly wanted to fight for the position of the Sovereign of Dawn, which caused undercurrents to surge in all of Dark Dawn. However, the invasion of Arid Triad caused all of this to become even more confusing. At the very least, during the time of war, The undercurrents could not be stirred up, or else with Saint Fire watching them covetously by the side, their cooperation would instantly crumble. At that moment, in the expanse cosmos belonging to Yin Pei in Dark Dawn's Three Sovereigns expanse cosmos, was an oasis in a boundless desert. There was a man and a woman in the oasis, and they were sitting by a table. Their gazes landed on a black jade slip placed on the table, and there was slight hesitation on their faces. This is the jade slip Yin Pei sent a few months ago. That terrifying existence is about to arrive. The wind in the desert blew past them. It was dry, but when it landed in the oasis, it turned gentle. With a cool breeze, it landed on the two people's bodies and lifted the woman's beautiful hair, revealing a pretty face that would make all those who saw it feel their hearts clench in pain. She was the sovereign of Dawn Ziruo from East Draw tribe in Dark Dawn's camp. She was dressed in a long purple dress, had a head of black hair that spread down her back, a face that was incredibly exquisite and beautiful, and there were two purple crystals at the center of her brows. She was the famous sovereign of Dawn Ziruo in Dark Dawn's camp. When she spoke softly, she lifted her head and moved her gaze away from the jade slip to look at an old man with a head full of white hair on the other side of the table. The old man's eyes were bright and full of life. He had an awe-inspiring expression on his face, and when he opened and closed his eyes, everyone could see vertical pupils. One of them was yellow, and the other was red, causing him to look incredibly strange. Even if he was sitting there, he looked like he could change the laws in the world. He was the strongest sovereign of Dawn in Dark Dawn's camp. Song San knew, this person has the power to kill those in Avacania realm. He has fused with the will of a true world in Era Triad, and he has also sealed a powerful warrior from the previous Aeon who has awakened through some unknown method. His aura makes Yin Pei think of those old fellows who are in deep slumber. Is he the strongest of this Aeon? When the old man spoke faintly, his pupils shrank, but there seemed to be a hint of fighting spirit that was about to burn within them. I wonder if I can unleash the full power of my cultivation base, he said in a hoarse voice. Would I be able to kill him? If I could kill him, would I be able to make another breakthrough in my cultivation base? The desire to do battle grew stronger in his eyes. Ziruo frowned and cast a glance at the old man in front of her. But Yin Pei wants us to be respectful to this person and to cooperate fully with him when he comes here. This will only bring benefits to Dark Dawn, and there will be no drawbacks. In fact, this might be a chance for us to become the masters of Saint Fire. Ziruo said softly. A chance? That's Yin Pei's servile nature acting up again. Is it that difficult to kill those in Avacania realm? The old man lowered his head and cast a cold glance at Ziruo. Ziruo fell silent. To me, I can also kill those in Avacania realm. I have already killed 3 of the powerful warriors from before this Aeon, and he can only seal one. If that person doesn't come to Dark Dawn, it will be fine, but if he does, then he will be my prey. Once I kill him, I will henceforth be my 4th servant. The old man swung his arm and stood up. Then it's decided. A resolute look appeared on the old man's face. As he spoke, he stepped into the air, leaving behind the sovereign of Dawn, Ziruo, in the oasis. She stared at the jade slip on the table and sighed in her heart. If a person is too confident, they will not be able to see themselves clearly. The 3 powerful warriors from the previous eons, Tsang, Sinu killed, were all people who had given up on eternity and separated their souls on their own. They were people who already had the will to die. And the powerful warriors from the previous eons who were sealed in Yin Pei's jade slip are clearly the incredibly powerful ones. Song San came to die on his own, but my tribe and the other tribes who are attached to me cannot offend Su Ming. But Ziruo gritted her teeth, got up, and disappeared from the oasis in the galaxy. When she was in midair, she came to a halt. A strange light shone in her eyes, as if a thought had suddenly appeared in her mind. Gradually, her face became a little blank, but the light in her eyes became even brighter. Since this person is so strong and is known by Yin Pei to be the strongest of this Aeon, then if I can have a child with such a powerful warrior, the child born with such a bloodline will definitely have a limitless future. When she thought of this, Zirua's pretty face turned even redder. She had never had a partner since she started walking down the path of cultivation, and she had always believed that she did not need one. However, in the depths of her heart, there had always been a regret of wanting to have her own child. However, when she looked at the entire universe, she believed that there was no man who was the most outstanding, not even Song Sen knew. Yet at that moment, Su Ming's name appeared in her mind. But it's impossible for an old monster like him to agree to this. I have to think of something. Zirua's heart pounded. Once this thought appeared in her mind, she could not get rid of it no matter what she did. Instead, it became stronger. The feeling of danger brought by plotting against a powerful warrior caused Zirua to suck in a deep breath. An indistinct shadow appeared behind her, and judging by its appearance, it was clearly a lotus. There was a white fox on it, and it looked as if it was alive. A resolute look appeared on her face, and with one move, she disappeared from the sky. At the same time, in St. Defire's camp in Arid Triad's second expanse cosmos, a similar jade slip was placed in front of 3 people. One of them was an old man, one was a woman, and the last was a middle-aged man. The old man was naturally Xianjiao from St. Defire. As for the woman, even if Su Ming had never seen her in person, he was definitely not unfamiliar with her. She was Fei Hua from St. Defire's expanse cosmos, who had sent the supreme ring to Arid Triad's gap. It was also this woman who had caused the bald crane to have a confused and complicated look on its face at that time. As for the last middle-aged man, his expression was calm, but there was a hint of gloom in his eyes. He stared at the jade slip and let out a cold harumph. The strongest in this aeon. Isn't that sovereign of Dawn Yin, Pei, making a mountain out of a molehill? If any of the seniors in Sleeping Valley wakes up, they could be considered the strongest. The middle-aged man was the 3rd St. Defire from St. Defire's camp. His name was Xiao Song. Yin Pei might seem aloof, but in truth, he is incredibly cautious. He has always judged the situation. He sent this jade slip to us a few months ago and told us that Su Ming would come. He must be harboring malicious intentions, but based on this, we can tell that he is incredibly confident in Su Ming. He wants to use him to put pressure on us. Xianjiao sighed softly. When he spoke in a hoarse voice, a hint of resolve appeared on his face. Oh well, I will calculate just what sort of threat Su Ming poses. A glint appeared in Xianjiao's eyes. When he lifted his right hand, 9 irregular beast bones appeared on his palm. He struck them with his left hand, then closed his eyes and executed his inborn divine ability to divine Su Ming. Xiao Song's expression became alert. He immediately focused his attention and looked over. He knew just how powerful Xianjiao's art was. He could even divine the karma of the sleeping old monsters. This art had never failed before. Only Fei Hua had a slightly dazed expression on her face. She continued staring into the distance, and for some unknown reason, a hint of tremble had appeared in her heart. It was as if the most important existence in her life had appeared in this expanse cosmos. The official WeChat account was so troublesome. Chapter 1424. Dark Dawn's camp was located in another region within the 180 expanse cosmoses. It was far away from St. Defire's boundary and Arid Triad's gap. It belonged to the 137th expanse cosmos. There was a tribe in that expanse cosmos known as Bear Chart Tribe. They occupied that expanse cosmos and had been passed down since the second era of Arid Triad's Aeon. They had hundreds of thousands of people, and they could not be considered big, but neither could they be considered small. The 137th expanse cosmos was also known as Bear Chart Expanse Cosmos, and Bear Chart Tribe was the ruler of that expanse cosmos. In this Bear Chart world, there had always been 3 sacrificial altars in the boundless starry sky. They floated in the starry sky, motionless. It had been like this for countless years. Around these 3 sacrificial altars, the Bear Chart Tribe had set up restrictive formations that slowly surrounded this place, turning it into a forbidden land. Protecting this place seemed to be Bear Char tribe's mission, and it had always been carried out. The three altars looked incredibly old. One of them was mostly damaged and exuded an ancient air of decay. There was also a huge crack at the center of the altar, which looked like it had already pierced through it. If anyone stood on the altar and lowered their heads, they would be able to see the galaxy beneath the crack. The crack might have already pierced through the altar, but there seemed to be a strange power in it that prevented the altar from splitting apart. Instead, it looked as if they were absorbing each other, and they did not move. The third altar was relatively well preserved. On that day, the altar suddenly shone with a dark light. That dark light instantly reached a piercing degree. When it surrounded the entire altar, the originally sturdy stone platform above, it looked as if it had melted. Once the entire platform sank in, some bubbles popped up on it, making it look like a swamp. Who is it? Who's muttering about me? The bald crane shuddered and popped its head out of the altar. As it thrashed about with all its might, it flew out of the altar that looked like a swamp. Right when it flew out, it immediately looked around in puzzlement. The strange feeling that had appeared in its head after it stepped into Dark Dawn and St. Defire's expanse cosmos made it want to search for it, but it could not find the source of it. Immediately after, the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei appeared on the swamp-like altar. He turned into a long arc and flew out. He immediately wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply towards the altar. Almost at the instant he bowed, Su Ming's figure slowly appeared from the altar. He walked out, and the stone platform that had turned into a swamp under his feet was like mud. But when Su Ming walked out, it parted on its own, as if it did not dare to block his path. When Su Ming walked into the galaxy, the altar behind him froze up again, and the dark light faded away. Su Ming cast a cold glance at the area, then cast his indifferent gaze on Yin Pei. Master, Arid Triad's Gap is in St. Defire's camp. If you go there and want to come to Dark Dawn, you will run into some interference. This is the ancient relocation rune I mentioned before. It's connected to Dark Dawn, Yin Pei immediately said. His voice was incredibly respectful. Su Ming swept his gaze past the three altars. Once he cast them a few scrutinizing glances, he sensed a presence that did not belong to this aeon. It was clearly a sign that had existed for a very long time. However, since one of the altars was still in good condition, Yin Pei had secretly modified it and turned it into a method to protect his life. Based on what he had said on the way, no matter where he was, as long as he had some time to prepare, he could immediately relocate to this place. After all, he was a member of Bear Char tribe. He was a sovereign of Dawn who walked out of this tribe. He might have an expanse cosmos belonging to a sovereign of Dawn, but in the end, he still belonged to Bear Char tribe. Only those from Bear Char tribe would have the chance to study the existence of the three altars carefully and use them, and Yin Pei was one of the best at using them. Master, are you interested in these three altars? Based on Bear Char tribe's analysis and observations over the years, we've discovered the functions of these three altars. In the beginning, the first altar relocated people to a place far away. We don't know the specifics, but compared to the second altar, the distance is definitely much shorter because the second altar has disappeared over the years. However, there are some presences stored in the tribe, and we can sense a vast and indescribable presence. It's as if cultivators are as insignificant as ants in the place where that presence is contained. Yin Pei fell into pensive silence for a moment, but he did not express his thoughts too clearly because he himself did not completely understand this. He only knew that the first and second altars were damaged. Only the third altar could allow people to return to this place from various places. If it was used skillfully, it could bring about a critical effect at certain moments. If there's a place where this presence is stored, I can sense it. Su Ming averted his gaze from the altars. When he spoke faintly, the invisible rune around the three altars suddenly shone with a gentle light. It turned into ripples that spread out, and dozens of long arcs charged over. In an instant, they closed in and turned into cultivators. The person in the lead was a man. He was incredibly built, and when he took a step forward, the shadow of a huge bear manifested behind him. When he got closer, the man immediately wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply towards Yen Pei. "I, tribe elder of Bear Chart Tribe, greet the sovereign of dawn." The man's voice was like a tidal wave. When it traveled outwards, the dozens of people behind him wrapped their fists in their palms and bowed towards Yen Pei. Their voices of worship were like waves of sound that spread through the area. How many star offering stones still have their presences intact in the tribe? At the instant the ripples from the runes spread out, not a single hint of flattery could be seen on Yen Pei's face. Instead, he turned into an awe-inspiring and aloof air, turning into the supreme sovereign of dawn in the eyes of the cultivators of dark dawn. By the side, the bald crane had a scornful look on its face. It turned its head around in disdain, but in its heart, it was copying everything about Yen Pei. Being diligent and eager to learn was a very good habit of the bald crane. Sovereign of Dawn, there are 5-star offering stones that are still in perfect condition. The seals on them have not been broken, which is why their presences have not spread out. If you need them, Sovereign of Dawn, I will have someone bring them over, the man from Bear Char Tribe immediately said respectfully. He cast a glance at Su Ming out of the corner of his eye while trying to guess his identity in his heart. Bring 3 of them over. There are only a limited number of these stones that contain ancient presences. Your tribe should keep some of them, Yen Pei said slowly after a moment of pensive silence. Yen Pei remained silent for a moment before he spoke slowly. The man immediately wrapped his fist in his palm and expressed his obedience before he turned around to look at an old man beside him. Once the old man nodded, his body moved swiftly and he turned into a gigantic bear that was 1,000 feet in size. As he roared at the sky, he turned into a long arc afterimage that instantly left into the distance. When the old man left into the distance, Su Ming did not bother himself with the conversation between Yen Pei and the man from Bear Chart Tribe. With an indifferent expression, he walked forward. The bald crane quickly followed behind him, even casting a smug glance at the sovereign of Dawn Yen Pei. The people from Bear Char Tribe had never seen Su Ming before, and neither could they sense any ripples of power from him. However, they knew that since he could walk with the sovereign of Dawn, there was definitely something extraordinary about him, but they would not offend him. When the cultivators from Bear Char Tribe looked over, their pupils shrank and shock appeared on their faces. They could clearly see that once Su Ming's body touched the ripples from the invisible rune, the rune shuddered and disappeared before Su Ming, as if it was retreating on its own. This scene not only shocked the people from Bear Char Tribe, even the tribe elder of Bear Char Tribe sensed something and turned his head around swiftly. His pupils shrank, and disbelief appeared on his face. The runes surrounding Bear Char Tribe had been passed down for a long time. Over the course of countless years, it had been continuously perfected by generations of people. Its power might not be reflected in its offense, but its defense alone was something that even powerful warriors in Avacania realm could forget about breaking within a short period of time. Not a single ripple could be seen on the rune. It was as if the rune had retreated on its own, like subjects worshipping their emperor and not daring to block it. This was the feeling that rose in the tribe elder's mind at that moment. The expression of the tribe elder of Bear Chart Tribe changed drastically. As his heart roared, he instinctively asked, Who is he? He is the strongest cultivator in the universe, and even if all of Dark Dawn worked together, they would still not be his opponent. The sovereign of Dawn Yen Pei mumbled with zealous looks in his eyes. Once Su Ming walked out of the rune, he stared at the galaxy before him. With an indifferent expression, his will swept through the area, and in an instant, it covered the entire expanse cosmos. It's a very small expanse cosmos, and it hasn't given birth to a will yet. But it's clear that there is a boundary between it and the other expanse cosmoses. It doesn't seem to have formed on its own. Instead, it seems like someone used a great divine ability to divide it and create it. When Su Ming's will spread out, Yen Pei flew out of the rune and arrived beside him. Investigate for me the tunnel you and Dark Dawn set up in the Fifth Ocean in the barren lands of divine essence in the past. It might not have been activated, but where are the people guarding it right now? Su Ming said faintly. He pulled back his will and did not forcefully sweep through the 180 expanse cosmoses. After all, this place also belonged to Arid Triad. Yin Pei immediately voiced his obedience. Just as he was about to say something else, a long arc charged forth from the distance. Naturally, it was the old man who had brought the star offering stones. Once the old man closed in, he immediately bowed to Yin Pei and handed him 3 jade boxes. Su Ming swept his gaze past the jade boxes, and his pupils shrank in a barely noticeable manner. He lifted his right hand and seized the air. The 3 jade boxes immediately charged towards destiny. Su Ming grabbed one of them, and with a light squeeze, the jade box shattered to reveal a stone the size of a fingernail. At the instant the jade box shattered, it spread out, a presence that caused Su Ming's expression to turn solemn. Su Ming could not recognize this presence, but he could tell with just one glance that it did not come from any of the expanse cosmoses in Arid Triad. It did not come from harmonious Morris Alba either. Perhaps more accurately speaking, this presence did not belong to harmonious Morris Alba in the vast expanse. This presence came from the world beyond. Chapter 1425. The entire process lasted for a dozen-something breaths from the moment the presence appeared to the moment it disappeared. When the fingernail-sized stone in his hand no longer had any presence that did not belong to harmonious Morris Alba, a faint glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. A world beyond harmonious Morris Alba. Huh? A contemplative look appeared on Su Ming's face. When the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei saw Su Ming's expression, he was stunned for a moment. He had sensed the presence in the stone before, but he found it unfamiliar. Aside from that, he did not sense anything else. These pieces of stone were fragments from a second altar. However, due to the uniqueness of the aura, they were constantly dissipating. Perhaps they would completely disappear in a few years, so the Bear Temu tribe had used this method to preserve the last batch many years ago. However, this retention wasn't perfect. Once the seal on each stone was broken, the aura could only be felt for a dozen or so breaths of time. After that, the aura would completely disappear. Yin Pei was not the only one who was stunned. The dozens of people from Bearchar tribe also saw the pensive look on Su Ming's face, and they could not quite understand why he was acting this way. This aura was only unfamiliar. Apart from that, no matter how much they studied it, they could not find any other benefits. By the looks of it, the second altar is really a relocation rune, but it's not a relocation rune between harmonious Morris Alba and Arid Triad's expanse cosmos. Instead, it's a butterfly that can send people out of harmonious Morris Alba. When Su Ming thought of this, shock rose in his heart. With his level of cultivation, he rarely felt this way over the years, but the presence and the altar made him think of a possibility. Perhaps when the 4 wings of harmonious Morris Alba overlapped with each other and spread out eons after eons, some cultivators chose to fuse with their other selves to survive, some chose to possess them, and some left behind the legacy of All Spirits Hall. But there were also some who chose to leave. This was a true departure. He left harmonious Morris Alba's body and went to the world beyond, to the vast expanse where the other 8 butterflies were. Su Ming did not know what was in that place. Even if he had reached his current level of cultivation, he still did not know. Compared to the entire universe, he was as weak as an ant. In silence, a glint suddenly appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he lifted his head to look at Yin Pei. "Bring me all of these stones." Yin Pei's heart trembled. There was a look in Su Ming's eyes that allowed no argument, and it made his skin crawl. He did not dare say a single word. Without a hint of hesitation, Yin Pei immediately looked towards the tribe elder of Bearchart tribe. The Bearchart tribe, Great Father's expression continued to change. He gritted his teeth and flew off into the distance. In the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, The area was completely silent. No one spoke, and gradually, an invisible pressure filled the area, making it difficult for everyone to circulate their cultivation bases. After the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, the tribe elder of Bear Chart tribe charged over. He did not give them to the sovereign of Don Yen Pei, but personally handed 3 jade boxes to Su Ming respectfully. Once Su Ming took them, he cast a glance at the man before him and nodded. "I won't ask for your items for free." When Su Ming spoke, he lifted his left hand and tapped the center of the man's brows. His speed was so fast that before the man could react to it, his body jolted. He staggered a few steps back and coughed up a mouthful of black blood. As he shuddered, a large amount of black blood instantly seeped out of his pores. As the expressions of his people changed drastically, the man immediately raised his hand to signal his people not to move. He lifted his head with great difficulty, and crazed joy and excitement appeared on his face, along with disbelief. He could clearly sense that his blood seemed to have become 10 times purer at that instant. As the black blood appeared, the shadow of the huge bear behind him grew exponentially. It was no longer an illusion, but had gained corporeal form. This could be said to be the greatest serendipity he had ever received in his life. His blood had been purified, and his level of cultivation had increased exponentially. His presence had also become stronger. With excitement, the man bowed deeply towards Su Ming. Thank you for giving me a new life." When the man spoke in excitement, Su Ming did not speak. Instead, he lowered his head to look at the jade box in his hand. His expression was dark, and after a moment, a resolute look appeared on his face. "I like to see just what sort of world this presence comes from." Su Ming no longer hesitated. He swung his right hand, and immediately, banging sounds reverberated in the air. 2 of the 5 jade boxes around him immediately shattered, revealing 2 irregular stone shards within. A thick, unfamiliar presence also instantly spread out from them. At the instant the presence spread out, Su Ming seized the air with his right hand. Immediately, the presence gathered together and turned into a small ball that was rapidly dispersing on his palm. When Su Ming pushed it at the center of his brows, he closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, his will erupted from him and gathered on the small ball at the center of his brows. Once it filled up, a shocking roar rang out in Su Ming's head. He swiftly used the presence as a guide, his will as a bridge, and his art of time as a divine ability to execute the divine art of reversal that only he could cast. Su Ming shuddered. His will felt as if it had moved through an endless amount of time and swam through one aeon after another until a vast expanse appeared in front of his eyes. It was the exact same as the world in which the 9 butterflies danced in the air. Endless fog tumbled about continuously. In fact, when Su Ming looked at it, he had a strong feeling that the power contained in each tumble could instantly destroy a powerful warrior in Avacania realm. Even Su Ming himself would find it difficult to withstand the tumbling fog if he truly ran into it. And this was just the most commonly seen tumbling fog in the vast expanse. Occasionally, bolts of lightning would swim about in the fog. Each bolt of lightning was distorted and gave off a ferocious feeling. They were not real lightning bolts, just bright and irregular lines, but it was these irregular lines that made Su Ming sense death. He could clearly tell that with his current body and cultivation, his body and soul would definitely be destroyed by the lightning, and only his will would remain. However, even if only his will remained, he would definitely die after being touched by the lightning a few times. Su Ming was silent. He followed the guidance of the presence and moved through time. He swam through the tumbling fog and lightning in an unreal manner until he saw a butterfly in the layers of fog. It was not a harmonious Morris alba, because the picture on its wings was different. The butterfly was trembling and crumbling at that moment. Above it was a feng shui compass that was about the same size as its body. It was absorbing something from the butterfly, and when the butterfly shuddered, it turned into sparkles of crystalline light. Once they were all absorbed by the feng shui compass, Su Ming saw a black-robed young man sitting cross-legged on it while holding a string of pearls in his hand. I got the 6th reverse spirit, but I wonder, where is the 7th reverse spirit? This was the black-robed young man's voice. At the instant his voice landed in Su Ming's ears, the young man suddenly lifted his head. His eyes seemed to contain emptiness as he looked at Su Ming. There's another very important thing. I've finally finished setting up my public WeChat account, but only now do I realize that I can't be verified because I need a certain number of fans. Please, if I can't be verified in the end, it'll be too embarrassing. I heard that there are some authors who have more than 1 million fans, and even the smallest of them have more than 100,000. I'm not asking for a lot. I just want to reach the target of 100,000. Yes, friends of Baidu, friends of Qidian, friends of wireless reading. For the first time, Earroot begs his fans to pick up their phones and search for the public account. Find the word Earroot and follow me. I beg for your support and don't ignore me. Chapter 14:26. A fierce glare shone in the black-robed young man's eyes, as if he could see Su Ming's while moving through the passage of time. When he looked over, Su Ming's heart trembled. A feeling as if there was some sort of emperor's will in the man's gaze instantly rose in his heart. The domineering look in his eyes made it seem as if he was the only supreme being in the world. Those who obeyed him would prosper, and those who opposed him would die. If anyone dared to show even the slightest hint of defiance, he would immediately destroy their entire family, and their bloodline would be completely cut off. In fact, even if they did not have any intention to go against him, if they hesitated in the slightest, they would have to face his lightning gaze and his killing intent that would make it seem as if the sky was collapsing. This blatant, domineering look seemed to be the peak of all existences. It had arrogance, confidence, and an arrogance that made it seem as if he could stand above all lives. His gaze was cold, but Su Ming felt as if there was a voice echoing in his ears at that instant. It might not have come from the black-robed young man, but Su Ming felt as if it was truly echoing in his ears. If you provoke me, then no matter where you hide, no matter what level of cultivation you have, no matter what sort of protectors you have by your side, no matter if you come from the past or the future, as long as you provoke me, I will kill you, destroy your entire family, destroy your bloodline, and destroy all traces of you. Begone! A faint voice with endless aloofness spoke languidly. At the instant it spoke, Su Ming's will let out a bang. It was as if the voice and the aloof expression were a storm that could destroy all of Su Ming's will. The storm raged in the space where Su Ming was. His mind roared, and his entire will seemed to turn into a huge vortex that instantly devoured him. Su Ming's body jolted, and his eyes flew open. He was still in Dark Dawn's camp, still in the 137th Expanse Cosmos. Before him was the man from Bear Chart Tribe, and by his side was the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei. The people from Bear Chart Tribe around him did not know what Su Ming had gone through, but their faces were pale, especially the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei. His level of cultivation was the highest, which was why he could sense it even more strongly. During that instant, the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei could clearly sense that Su Ming's presence had disappeared, and it was filled by an ancient will. It was as if he had been standing there, but his body had been covered by fog. If it was just indistinct, it would have been fine, but Yanpei could clearly sense an unfamiliar presence around Su Ming. That presence was so strong that it could make all of Dark Dawn, Saint D-Fire, and even Arid Triad tremble. But he could only sense it here, and it didn't spread out at all. Su Ming understood all of this. He knew everything, and he also knew that not only could the black-robed young man's presence make Arid Triad tremble, even the former harmonious Morris Alba tremble in fear, because Su Ming had personally seen the black-robed young man easily devour a butterfly that was exactly the same as the harmonious Morris Alba and send it into the enchanted vessel that looked like a feng shui compass. Who is he? Su Ming's pupil shrank. This was the greatest sense of danger he had ever felt since he became the strongest of his Aeon. Before this, he had never expected that there would be such a powerful warrior in the vast expanse. This sort of powerful warrior surpassed the limits of Su Ming's thoughts, causing a brilliant light to suddenly shine in his eyes in the midst of his silence. This matter was like a thorn that stabbed into the depths of his heart, and it also made Su Ming understand that at that moment, fear rose within him. This was something he had not felt for many years. It was only when he was in Divine Essence Star Ocean that he had felt something similar. In the past, he did not want to be suppressed, because he could not afford to lose. If he lost, he would die. Right then, he could not be suppressed, because once he reached his level of cultivation, once he had the thought of retreating in his heart, he would no longer be himself. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand and swung his arm. 2 of the 3 jade boxes in front of him immediately shattered, and the ancient presence spread out from them again. Su Ming seized the air with his hands, and it immediately charged towards him. It surrounded him and formed a vortex in front of him. It spun rapidly, and the ancient presence in it became even thicker. Su Ming stared at the vortex, and determination appeared on his face again. If I give up on this, then my heart will not be able to accept it. If my heart will not be able to accept it, then my mind will not be able to accept it. If my heart will not be able to accept it, then my mind will not be able to accept it. For the first time ever since Su Ming's will reach perfection, a ferocious look appeared on his face. It caused Yin Pei's heart to tremble. He had never seen such an expression on Su Ming's face before, and it seemed to make his heart freeze. If even he reacted in this manner, then it was even more so for the other members of Bear Chart tribe. They were completely intimidated by Su Ming's expression. Their minds instantly turned blank, and they lost the ability to think. If my heart is unsettled, my thoughts are not clear, and my mind is restless, then I will break through. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the vortex, holding it in his hand. The vortex swiftly shrank, and when it was in Su Ming's hand, it had already turned into the size of an egg. Once he held it, he pushed it at the center of his brows without any hesitation. At the instant he did so, a bang rang out in Su Ming's head. His world turned into a vortex again, and a vast universe appeared before his eyes once more. His world started flowing in the past once more, and he returned to the scene he had seen previously. He saw the black-robed young man using the feng shui compass to absorb the butterfly. He saw the black-robed young man lift his head and hum in Su Ming's direction. Almost at the instant the young man's voice rang out, Su Ming's will instantly turned cold, as if the world was about to crumble. It was as if the young man was an emperor, and Su Ming was an ant that could be wiped off in the next breath. However, as Su Ming gritted his teeth, all his will gathered on the power of Morning Dao World, Immortal Sect World, Sky Hill World, and the Emperor of Abyss True Worlds to turn into an incredibly powerful madness. It turned into his life, sword that could break the heavens, and it charged towards the person who had dared to let out a cold snort at him. Su Ming had to deliver that sword strike. He had to break it. His heart was filled with injustice, his thoughts could not be cleared, and his mind could not be at ease. He had to break it. Booming sounds instantly reverberated in the world. Su Ming could not see the result, because at the instant his will touched the young man, it had already crumbled into pieces. If I can't break it, then I won't touch it. But if there comes a day when I will clash against it, then I will rebel against all those who steal my kismet. This was a roar from Su Ming's soul before his will crumbled. That roar seemed to still echo in Su Ming's mind. He opened his eyes, and he found himself still in the galaxy of Dark Dawn's camp. The area around him was still the same as before. Fatigue appeared in Su Ming's eyes, but there was also a solemn air about him that only he could understand. There are only 2,000 words in this chapter. I will fill them up, and I will definitely do so. Something happened today, and my heart is filled with injustice. My thoughts cannot be cleared, and my mind cannot be at ease. I will break it. I will write this chapter because of today. Chapter 14:27. When Su Ming borrowed the aura from the stone piece in the jade box and chose not to hide in the ancient past, which was an unknown number of eons ago, he faced the black-robed young man, drew his sword, and turned it into a sword formed by his will to charge forward. Xianjiu had his eyes closed in the hall where the three lords of Saint Defire sat. His body trembled nonstop. The beast bones in front of him instantly shattered. His calculations seemed to have been disrupted by a great force, causing him to look like he was about to open his eyes. Pain appeared on his face. It was as if the power to open his eyes did not come from him, but from space. It was as if there was some sort of power in space that prevented Xianjiu from divining everything about Su Ming. However, no matter what, he was the Lord of Saint Defire with the longest lifespan among Saint Defire and Dark Dawn's camps. The depth of his foundation and the breadth of his thoughts were not something a normal person in Avacania realm could hope to compare to. Almost at the instant the beast bones shattered into dust and Xianjiu was about to force his eyes open, Xianjiu closed them tightly. At the same time, he lifted his right hand and made a grasping motion in the air with his fingers as he uttered a single word. Clang! When he said it, his right hand shuddered. The other two lords of Saint Defire could clearly see the flesh and blood on Xianjiu's right hand instantly melt into a puddle of blood, revealing the bones underneath, but the hand did not stop. It was as if it could not feel pain. It stretched into space, and at the instant it touched space, all 180 expanse cosmoses in Saint Defire's camp shuddered. At the same time, the old man's right hand seemed to have seized some sort of substance in space. When he yanked it outwards, the bone in his index finger shattered, followed by the second finger, the third finger, and when all three fingers were crushed, he yanked out a ball of fog from space. It was a cyclone that spun continuously in front of Xianjiu. It exuded waves of ancient presence. It seemed to have come from the past, and if anyone came into contact with it, they would feel as if their entire bodies were about to rot. Cold sweat trickled down Xianjiu's forehead. By his side, the man and woman from Saint Defire were watching all of this without blinking. This was not the first time they saw Xianjiu perform a divination, but it was the first time they saw Xianjiu performing this art in such a wretched and shocking manner. After a moment, Xianjiu's eyes flew open. They were bloodshot, and they covered his pupils, as if they had formed a blood-red rune. Blood gushed out of his mouth, and the vortex in front of him started showing signs of dispersing. Xianjiu looked even older than before and didn't stop coughing up blood. He coughed up 9 more mouthfuls, each of which caused his aura to grow weaker. By the time he coughed up the 9th mouthful of blood, he staggered backward a few paces. He looked so old that he looked like a corpse that had been buried in a coffin for countless years without rotting. Even though he was old, and even though he coughed up 9 mouthfuls of blood, Xianjiu laughed loudly. His laughter was hoarse, but there was a hint of delight in it. It might be weak, but it was as if he wanted to use it to tell the other 2 Saint Defires that he had managed to divine the truth. Army Destroyer descends. Harmonious Morris Alba's disaster. Su Ming's disaster. He will definitely die from this disaster. He can't escape from this disaster. This disaster has already appeared. His will has crumbled in the past. Without the past, there would be no present. He is already dead. Before old man Xianjiu could finish speaking, his expression suddenly changed. Before he could do anything, his body trembled. The dissipating fog in front of him was like a withered tree that had come back to life. It stopped dissipating and was about to return to the void. This is impossible. This is... Madness appeared in Xianjiu's eyes, just as he was about to seize the vortex again at the same time in Dark Dawn's camp. Spirit! Su Ming's eyes flew open. He was surrounded by Dark Dawn's camp and the 137th Expanse Cosmos. The sovereign of Dawn Yanpei was staring fixedly at Su Ming, as well as the man from Bear Chart Tribe and his tribesmen. At that moment, their faces were pale. During the instant just then, they could clearly sense a thick aura of death from Su Ming. That aura was so strong that it seemed like it could drown the entire world. But at the instant it reached its peak, it suddenly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, Su Ming opened his eyes. His will returned to his body. It was as if everything that had happened before was just an illusion, a fragment that had never existed in the past. However, it was precisely because of this fragment that Su Ming felt as if he had been baptized, and he had become different from the past, something that no one else could see, but Su Ming himself knew clearly. Once he opened his eyes, he said the word spirit. Even Su Ming himself did not know why he said it. Instead, he had used that presence as a guide, and the scenes from the ancient past allowed Su Ming to move between the past and the present. Due to his will crumbling in the past and gathering together in the present, he let out a syllable that would last for a long time. That sound was the word spirit. The word spirit in one sound seemed to contain some sort of supreme, profound meaning. The instant Su Ming opened his eyes, the light that shone from them seemed to have made the indignation in his heart instantly calm down. It made his thoughts, which had been in disarray, become smooth in an instant. It also made the uneasiness in his heart turn into peace in the blink of an eye. All of this was directly related to the unique sound that seemed to have existed in the vast expanse since ancient times. Su Ming still did not know what that connection was, but he could vaguely sense that when he came to understand it, his level of cultivation and his realm of cultivation would rise again, and he would reach a level that might be similar to the black-robed young man's. This was a direction. It was a direction that had never appeared in Su Ming's heart before, but at that moment, it had appeared. The young man was a danger, and perhaps he was also Su Ming's disaster. But this disaster could no longer make Su Ming feel indignant, his thoughts not smooth, and his mind restless, because Su Ming had found his direction. Because he had unintentionally said that sound, Su Ming felt as if he had been reborn, and a powerful belief was born in his soul. If Su Ming had not made the decision to face the black-robed young man, he might not have been able to do so. Only by facing everything and not being afraid, only by having his heart, thoughts, and mind at peace could he obtain the word spirit that would last for an eternity, and only then could he truly change. If I could face you once, then I can face you a second time. It doesn't matter whether it's arid triad or harmonious Morris alba. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. As he mumbled under his breath, he lowered his head and looked at the people around him. All the cultivators who met his gaze felt their hearts tremble, and they lowered their heads. He lifted his right hand and swung it. He put away the final jade box floating in front of him. Once it landed in his storage bag, Su Ming's voice echoed in the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's ears. Use the fastest speed possible to find the results of the task I've given you. Also, give me a map of the entire Dark Dawn's camp. When Su Ming's voice landed in the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's ears, he immediately lowered his head and voiced his obedience without any hesitation. He was incredibly shocked. Aside from Su Ming, his level of cultivation was the highest, which was why he could see some clues that others could not. During that instant just now, he had a strong feeling that Su Ming was already dead. He had been enveloped by the aura of death, and it came from the past. It was so oppressive that it would suffocate anyone who cast a glance at it. Yet all of this instantly changed when Su Ming uttered the word spirit. It was as if a withered tree had come back to life, and something rotten had turned into something magical. This scene echoed in the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's mind, and a huge storm stirred up in his heart. At the same time, Su Ming became even more mysterious in his eyes. At the same time, Yanpei brought out a jade slip. Once he handed it to Su Ming respectfully, he took a few steps back and waited for Su Ming's remaining orders. Su Ming took the jade slip. Once he cast a glance at it, he turned his head around to look at Yanpei. He lifted his right hand and pointed at Yanpei. Immediately, a vortex appeared at the center of Yanpei's brows. A hint of his soul flew out and fused into the jade slip before Su Ming put it away. This jade slip has fused with your soul. Once you find the results, say my name in your heart, and I will know your heart. Su Ming turned around and took a step into the air. In an instant, He disappeared from the 137th Expanse Cosmos belonging to Bear Chart tribe. The bald crane followed him swiftly. Before it left, it even turned its head around to cast a smug look at Yin Pei. However, that smugness was not great, because at the instant Su Ming's entire body was filled with the aura of death, the bald crane had sensed fear and a chill it had never felt in its life. At that moment, Xianjiu was in Saint Defire's camp when he lifted his hand in an attempt to seize the 7 vortexes again. His hand had indeed seized a vortex, but at the instant he touched it, his right hand crumbled with a bang. When he fell back, he coughed up blood again. This time, the blood he coughed up was black, as if he had suffered some sort of backlash. As he fell back, the vortex fused into the vortex and disappeared without a trace. That vortex is his life. I use my life in exchange for his to lure it out, but in this life, I can only lure it out once. I clearly saw his disaster death. I saw his will crumble, and he died under the power of Army Breaker. But he clearly died in the past, so why is he still alive? Why? Xianjiu mumbled and coughed up blood again. This time, at the instant he coughed up blood, he closed his eyes. He might not have breathed his last, but his vitality had been greatly damaged, and he fell unconscious. A chill instantly rose in the hearts of Xiao Song and Fei Hua from Saint Defire. The two of them cast each other a glance and fell silent. It was also at that moment that Song Sin Nu, the strongest sovereign of Dawn in Dark Dawn's camp, opened his eyes from where he was meditating. Fighting spirit and killing intent shone in them. At the instant Su Ming left the 137th Expanse Cosmos, he sensed his existence. I will fight against you. After this battle, I will be known as Fourth Slave. Today, I will release 1 chapter. Tomorrow, I will release 2 chapters. Then, I will release them for the next 3 days. This matter had nothing to do with WeChat and the Circle. It was a profound matter that could not be said, but everyone, you can be at ease. I'm fine now. Not only am I fine, I'm actually very well. Finally, I will ask you one more thing. Fellow Taoists, how many people do you think a sect of immortals needs to be considered a great sect? 10,000? 50,000? 100,000? Or 1 million? The public WeChat can be considered a sect, and it's a sect where everyone is a friend. This is very important to your ears. I need more people to pay attention to me. Please pick up your phones and open WeChat. Search for your ears in the public accounts. I will post pictures and information there. Everything related to me and my books will be posted there, including what happened over the past few days. I will also give you a simple explanation of what happened over the past few days to answer your questions. Please pay attention to me. Chapter 1428. Su Ming walked through the galaxy like a long arc wherever he went. The space behind him would shine with a dazzling light. It was as if rings of light were formed when he rubbed against the galaxy. There was a piercing whistle in the air, and wherever Su Ming went, the sky and earth would shake. He did not intentionally hide his presence. Neither did he intentionally spread out his will. He just walked calmly in space, and with an indifferent expression, he headed to the Spiritling's Expanse Cosmos, which was described in the Jade Slip with a map of Dark Dawn suppressing the Berserkers. He wanted to go to the Spiritlings, the place where his mother was born and grew up. There was no reason for him to do so. He just wanted to take a look at that place. He was not returning to his roots, because Su Ming's roots were not there, and neither were they in the 5th True World. His roots were once in the land of Berserkers, and they were once in the 9th Summit. But now, Su Ming's roots were in his heart. Wherever he went was where his roots would be. They were not fixed, and neither were they Katkins. Instead, they were a form of will. The Expanse Cosmos where the Spiritlings resided was very far away to a normal cultivator. They would usually need to fly for hundreds or even more than 1,000 years before they could move from one Expanse Cosmos to another. Even if they used a relocation rune, the crystals they would need would be astronomical. That was why there were few cultivators who had the right to move from Expanse Cosmos to another Expanse Cosmos in Dark Dawn's camp. and there was no need for them to move between expanse cosmos. Many cultivators would only spend their entire lives training in 2 or 3 expanse cosmoses. However, once they reached Avacania realm, everything would be different. They might not be able to move endlessly with just one thought, but it would be incredibly easy for them to move between expanse cosmoses. If that was the case for those in Avacania realm, then it would be even more so for Su Ming. With each step he took, he would cross most of an expanse cosmos. Usually, with just 2 steps, he would cross one expanse cosmos. Then, another barrier appeared in front of him. Based on the jade slip map in his head, that place was the expanse cosmos where the spiritlings resided. Su Ming stood outside the barrier, but he did not immediately step in. Instead, he closed his eyes and sensed his surroundings quietly for a moment. When he opened his eyes, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. At the instant he touched the barrier, he disappeared. The bald crane had followed him all the way, and at that moment, it followed Su Ming into the spiritling's expanse cosmos. However, at the instant Su Ming disappeared, ripples spread out in the distant galaxy, and Song San-nu appeared. There was killing intent in his eyes, and there was an awe-inspiring look on his face. He swung his arm, and his body turned into a long arc that instantly closed in on the barrier of the expanse cosmos. As ripples spread out from the barrier like water, his body disappeared. There was a huge block of ice floating in the galaxy of the spiritling's expanse cosmos. At that moment, the woman Su Ming had seen an arid triad expanse cosmos open her eyes. Ever since Su Ming went to Death Vortex, she chose to leave. She returned to Dark Dawn's camp through the gap between the 3 sovereigns, and once she returned to the spiritlings, she chose to isolate herself once more. Since she had already given Su Ming the sword and could not retrieve the power of the spiritlings from him, she decided to give up resolutely and no longer pursue the matter. Besides being related to the previous sacred lady, the most important reason for all of this was that Su Ming had awakened the spiritling's dragon of destruction. Yet at that moment, when Su Ming stepped into the spiritling's expanse cosmos, the woman in the ice opened her eyes. A hint of hesitation appeared in her eyes, and she looked into the distance. With her level of cultivation, it should have been impossible for her to notice Su Ming's arrival. But no matter what, she was the spiritling's sacred lady, and the will of the dragon of destruction contained in Su Ming's presence was like the brightest light in the dark to her. Because of it, she had immediately sensed him. After all, besides her being the sacred lady, this expanse cosmos was the spiritling's expanse cosmos. They had lived and multiplied in this expanse cosmos for countless years, causing it to be filled with endless spiritlings' thoughts. Su Ming's arrival caused the spiritlings' thoughts to feel as if they were boiling. They sensed the dragon of destruction's presence, which belonged to the supreme legends of the spiritlings. Is he here? The woman fell silent. As she mumbled under her breath, she disappeared from the ice. In the spiritlings' expanse cosmos was a planet that was not particularly dazzling, but was an incredibly sacred place in the hearts of all spiritlings. Its name was Violet Wisdom. Violet Wisdom Planet was the place where all the previous spiritlings tribe leaders, tribe dukes, and sacred ladies died. The ancestors of the spiritlings were buried in this place. If they died, they would be buried in this place. The sky was blue, and there were not many stars in it. On the ground was a boundless ocean. This was a planet occupied by the ocean. Besides quite a large number of islands, there were no rather large continents on it. The tribe leaders, tribe dukes, and sacred ladies of a certain generation were buried on each of the islands. They were densely packed together, and they were like stars in the ocean. They were protected by the spiritlings day and night, and they had been passed down to the present day. At that moment, Su Ming stood quietly in the sky above the planet and looked at the seawater beneath him. Waves surged in the seawater, and when they tumbled about, it looked as if there were sea dragons tumbling about in them. When it was calm, it looked like a mirror, but this mirror could not reflect a person's figure. It could only reflect the color of the sky. Su Ming looked in the direction of Su Ming's gaze. He was looking at one of the many islands on the sea. It was not big, and it was surrounded by a layer of green. It was covered in plants, and there were 3 altars on it. This was the same as the other islands. Each island had 3 altars arranged in the shape of a triangle. At the center was the tribe elder, to the right was the tribe leader, and to the left were the sacred ladies. Su Ming looked over quietly. His gaze pierced through the distance, and he saw that the sacred lady's tombstone on the left side of the island was empty. All the islands on the sea with a sacred lady's tombstone would have the sacred lady's name and a record of her life on it. Only this island did not have it. This emptiness did not mean that she was still alive, because the living did not have a tombstone. However, since she had already died in the passage of time, yet there was no word on her tombstone, it was thought-provoking. After a long while, Su Ming took a step forward. When he reappeared, he was already on the altar to the left of the island. He stood under the tombstone at the center of the altar and stared at the empty tombstone. There was not even a name on it. There was only a faint remnant of a soul that seemed to have been gathered together by the words on the tombstone and had already scattered into the air. At the instant Su Ming sensed that remnant, his heart trembled. He stared at the tombstone in a daze and sensed his mother's existence. Why is there no word on the tombstone? Does she not want the descendants of the tribe to know of her existence? Or does she not want me to? Su Ming fell silent. There was a slightly melancholic look on his face. He could not describe what he was feeling at that moment. There were complicated feelings, sighs, and anguish in his heart. Tell me what? Su Ming asked slowly while staring at the tombstone. His voice was no longer directed at the empty tombstone, but at the person who had appeared behind him at that moment. That person was not Song San Nu, but a woman. She was the Spiritling's sacred lady of this generation, the woman Su Ming had met in Arid Triad. She was his aunt. Before her life ended, she left behind a will. Not a single word could be written on the tombstone of her race, because she felt that she had let down the Spiritlings. She did not want the descendants of the tribe to know her name. The woman who had appeared behind Su Ming hesitated for a moment. When her voice echoed in the air, Su Ming lifted his right hand and pushed it against the tombstone. The woman was momentarily stunned. Her first reaction was that Su Ming wanted to shatter the tombstone. Her expression changed, and just as she was about to walk out, Su Ming had already lifted his hand. Some stone powder appeared on his palm, and there was the mark of the soul fragment on it. Su Ming held it in his hand and pushed it at the center of his brows. Immediately, the presence of time spread out from his body. That presence disappeared without a trace. Su Ming turned around and took a step forward, disappearing from the woman's sight. She had no idea where he went, and her expression instantly changed. She did not manage to finish her sentence. When she said those words, she stopped speaking. In silence, she cast a complicated look at the altar that represented the previous tribe elder of the tribe at the center. She sighed in her heart and turned around to leave. But at the instant she was about to leave, Su Ming's figure appeared out of nowhere at the spot where he had disappeared. It was as if he had never disappeared. What had disappeared was just the figure in the woman's eyes. When Su Ming executed the power of time, he would fuse himself into it to sense it, creating an illusion to others. In truth, he had always been there. At the instant his figure appeared, Su Ming's expression turned dark. An anger that had not been seen for many years appeared in his eyes. This anger was not a small one, but a great rage that surged to the heavens. When the weak were angry, they feared nothing in the world. When the strong were angry, they affected the universe. When cultivators were angry, their blood would spill in all directions. And when almighties were angry, the world would no longer be desolated. The others could see the ferocious expression on Su Ming's face. The flames in his eyes looked as if they could burn all lives, and he was like a volcano that was about to erupt and destroy the world. Nonsense! There was a dark tone in Su Ming's voice. When he turned around, he cast a glance at the woman. The woman's expression changed. At that moment, she felt as if Su Ming had turned into a murderous fiend from ancient times. With just one sentence and one gaze, the woman's heart immediately roared, and she felt as if she was about to break down. She instinctively took a few steps back. However, the moment she moved back, Su Ming had already closed in on her. He lifted his right hand and seized her neck. "I won't kill you." At the instant Su Ming said those words coldly, he squeezed her neck with his right hand. With a bang, the woman's face turned pale, but not a single change could be detected on her. However, in the distant galaxy, the gigantic block of ice where she had isolated herself all year round instantly cracked, and with a bang, it shattered into pieces. "I destroyed your life force crystal as punishment for your silence in the past." The woman looked as if she wanted to say something, but when Su Ming said those words, her face instantly turned stark pale, and she no longer spoke. When Su Ming let go of her neck, she took a few steps back and coughed up a mouthful of blood. She cast a glance at the blank stone monument quietly, and tears fell from her eyes. "Big sister, I'm sorry. Now it's your turn. You stole your race's kismet so that you could live forever. But today, your life will come to an end." Su Ming turned around and lifted his head. His gaze instantly landed on the tombstone that represented the previous tribe elder of the spiritlings on the 3 altars on the island. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.